What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricky Varandas. Today we have an old friend, Robbie Martin, who's been on the show a few times. I'm not sure if he's been on 2 or 3 times, but he's definitely been on in the past. He's a really interesting guy, fun to talk to, and we have a very lengthy and interesting conversation. Every time he's on, we end up talking for 2-3 hours. So this episode really isn't any different. I don't know how long it went for. I believe it went for 2 or 3 hours also. And you might know him from Media Roots, which is the alternative news website, which he runs with his sister, Abby Barton, which you guys also might know from Breaking the Set, which was a very popular RT show, news show. And they have a new show called Empire Files, which I'll put the link to their YouTube channel in the show notes on our YouTube version of this episode. And like I always tell you guys, if you go on our YouTube channel or just search the Ripple Effect Podcast on Google or YouTube, you'll find it. And in the show notes, in the show description, you'll see links to our guests' work and my work. And the Empire Files is a great show. They do 1 episode a week. I believe it airs live on Telesur on Fridays, and shortly after, it's uploaded on the YouTube channel. So definitely check that out. Also, Robbie's on to talk about his new documentary called A Very Heavy Agenda. He's been on to talk about American Anthrax, which was, I believe, his first documentary. And check out the show archives if you want to see the conversation about that documentary specifically and the not untold, but the forgotten story after September 11th of the anthrax attacks. And I think that's it. I'll put links to his documentary, A Very Heavy Agenda, which you can purchase or you can rent. So check that out, and we'll talk more about the documentary and what it consists of during the episode, so I won't bore you with that now. What else? At the end of the episode, we have a special guest that pops up. Hopefully they aren't too loud or interrupts too much, but hopefully you guys enjoy that or at least tolerate it. And also some Theory 6 news. I have a remastered version of the previously released EP, The Ripple Effect, which, if you guys aren't familiar with Theory 6, it's my music project. I do all the music, all the lyrics, all the vocals, all the guitars, everything's done by me. Just it's a solo artist project, but I try to make it sound as full and as much like a band as possible. It's a mixture of metal and electronic music, and all the music that you hear on this podcast is Theory 6 music. So if you want to hear a stereo high quality version, then definitely check it out. It's available everywhere you can find music, Amazon, Google Play, iTunes, everywhere. And a remastered version of my previously released EP will be out the 20th of November. So check it out. I'll also put the whole album on YouTube so you can hear the music in high quality and remastered, and you can decide if you want to support the show and support the music project by purchasing some music. So anybody who has, I really appreciate it. Anybody who hasn't, please do. And if you do, I really appreciate it. It's a great way of supporting the podcast because it's not just giving money or donating money, but you're getting music in return. So you're getting something and in return for your donation to keep these projects going. So thanks again, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Hey.
What's up, Robbie?
How's it going, dude?
Not bad. Thanks for being with me.
Yeah, good to see you again.
I watched your documentary. Awesome work, man.
Oh, thanks.
The cool thing was how many just clips you got that I've never seen before. And that's what made it super interesting, was just like, I've never seen this interview. Oh, shit, they're talking about it here. And I think the craziest thing was how openly they would talk about this shit. Like, it was no big deal. You know, that was so surreal to me. It's just like, yeah, we're a part of PNAC. Yeah, we have this idea. And, you know, and it was just, to me, it was just, it was, because I always saw, like, PNAC and the whole, you know, thing, the whole think tank as this, like, secretive thing. And there wasn't much public talk about it, and to see them just openly talk about it on C-SPAN and, you know, with callers and just smiling while doing it, like it was, you know, to me it was surreal. So I mean, great work, man. I love the documentary, and people who haven't seen it, please check it out. It's called A Very Heavy Agenda Part 1, which I'm guessing because you're assuming you're going to make a couple more parts. Oh, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, is it mirrored on there? It probably is, huh? Can you see it the right way?
It just, I think there's some light reflecting off it a little bit, but there we go.
There's a better way to say it. Yeah. So it's out on DVD now. I ganked some think tank imagery for the packaging of the DVD. But yeah, it's going to be it's part of a continuing series, so there'll be 2 more parts coming out basically before 2016, and I'm still working on them now, hoping to get part 2 out towards the end of November, but it's looking less and less like that's probably going to happen. So yeah, just be patient, everybody who's already seen part 1 is looking forward to part 2.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where we always assume people are gonna like kill us if we don't get our shit out quick enough. Because I'm like that sometimes with podcasts. I'm like, fuck, I haven't had time to edit it. I need to get it out. I'm like, I haven't got anything out, and like I think every single day is crucial. And then if I don't get it out the next day, I'm like, oh shit, I didn't get any hate mail, and nobody's that angry. I'm like, why am I putting so much pressure on myself? I'm like, I should just get it done right and focus on that. And then because once it's out forever. So you're better off making people wait a month or 2, or maybe 3 months or whatever, how long it takes to get it done properly and where you're happy with it. Then look back and say, shit, man, if I just had another couple months or a couple weeks, I could have done it properly. I would have picked up on this or picked up on that, and you would have been maybe happier with the final product. So yeah, it's this thing where it's like we want to get things out quickly because we live in a world where there's constant things pulling for our attention, and there's just so much stuff online and so many just things just like I said, pulling for our attention, that you feel like if you aren't constantly putting something out, people just are gonna not give a shit anymore, move on to the next thing. So yeah, I mean, I've always had I think I'm getting better at thinking to myself, you know what, it's better putting out a good product later than maybe not as good of a product earlier. So
yeah, it's a good philosophy to follow.
Yeah. How long did it take you to put the documentary together? Because I mean, one thing, every time I watch a documentary, especially somebody who's independent like you and you don't have a big staff, I always wonder, I'm like, dude, the hours it must take to cut things and paste things and find the things that, you know, to find the clips you want and in the quality you want, and then get it, you know, just the levels of all the sounds and getting everything to you know, go, I guess, just look nice and entertaining while still getting your point across. I mean, it must take forever.
Yeah, I mean, it took me at least a year. I think the last time we talked, I was probably just starting working on it then. And I didn't even know if I was going to release it. It was more just a research project of mine where I was collecting, you know, a ton of video clips to see if I could just find, you know, as many self-incriminating videos of neocons just talking about their own ideas as I could, because, you know, as you're well aware, the Foreign Policy Initiative is basically the rebranded version of Project for the New American Century, which holds a very special place in you know, what is known as 9/11 conspiracy lore. And so, you know, I coming from that world a bit, you know, the 9/11 truth movement, I was always very intrigued by the Project for the New American Century, just in general. I didn't really know how, you know, whether this organization had a hand in 9/11 or not. It was more just how balls to the wall candid they were in the things that they were saying and they were asking for. You know, literally spelling out that to get the military transformation and buildup that we want would require something along the lines of a new Pearl Harbor, a catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. This was written at least a year before 9/11. The timing was extraordinarily prescient, if you want to use that word. I use that sometimes sarcastically when I'm talking about these things. But you would expect people who had been so predictive of such a crazy event would go out later and brag about it and say, we predicted this, we knew this was coming, yada, yada, yada. Very few of them did that. Paul Wolfowitz is probably one of the most interesting of these prescient people, besides Don Kagan, who we could talk about a little later. But I mean, he actually went out and did a speech at West Point Military Academy. I think it was in June of 2001, the summer before 9/11, basically saying that it's surprising that we're surprised by surprise attacks, because look what happened at Pearl Harbor. So why should we be so surprised if something like Pearl Harbor happens again? I'm not using his exact words, but it's extremely eerie when you watch this video. It goes far beyond even what you were talking about, which is just how candid and honest some of these people are about their neoconservative ideology. This is actually in a whole different league of what I would describe as extraordinarily prescient, borderline psychic thinking. If you believe in the supernatural, or these people knew something far more detailed and far more disturbing than anybody in the public knew, and that we still know today, including with all the leaks of these, bin Laden determined to attack the United States, memos that have gotten leaked. They're far more disturbing than that, because these people knew something that very interesting was coming. I mean, it's very clear, and it's not just because they were intellectuals and were able to see all these geopolitical puzzle pieces coming into play. I think it's because of something far more disturbing that we've yet to really face as a country. And I can say unequivocally that I am 100% convinced that at the very least the U.S. government, very high levels of the U.S. government, launched their own terrorist attack following 9/11, which was the 2001 anthrax letter attacks. I believe it actually did involve some of these actual neoconservatives. 9/11 is a little bit, not a little bit, it's a lot more confusing to look through and to see some of these connections. But I think when you start with the neocons and anthrax and sort of work backwards, you can start to see just something really, really sinister happening. That is far more sinister and easy to see than even some of these conspiracy theories about 9/11 in some ways. Way beyond the idea that the Bush administration lied about WMDs, way beyond just waging an illegal war because they always wanted to do it, but actually creating a climate of hysteria here, including actually killing real people, postal workers, sending anthrax to the Congress and the Senate. So we're dealing with some very dangerous individuals, regardless. I mean, their level of hubris is on display in a very heavy agenda. And once you tie it into, the way that we know they use the anthrax attacks to launch the Iraq War, it's just, it puts a whole new spin on it, I think.
Yeah, I love the fact that you focused on the anthrax attacks, because that's such a lost part of the whole story. And that's just it's something that people just kind of seem to forget, that some of the reason why it was a combination of things it was obviously the goal was to scare the fuck out of the public, and then that way people are going to react emotionally, not logically, and you convince them to do anything. And they did. They convinced the public that it was okay to invade a country that had nothing to do with September 11th, because we're so afraid that we just were willing to do anything if it meant make us safer. And that's what happened. And actually, I thought of you recently because Jen Briney, I don't know if you know who Jen Briney is. She has that podcast, Congressional Dish.
I'm not familiar with it, no.
Well, she just did a podcast on anthrax, because some bill that she found, and it was quite interesting, because it reminded me of you, because it was, really there isn't much conversation about the whole anthrax thing. So, and obviously you're one of those people who keep putting focus on it, so people don't forget, hey, like this was, this obviously was fucked up. It obviously had links to the government, the strain of anthrax and all this stuff. But she found a link with, I'm gonna fuck this up, but check out the podcast. I'll send you the link to it. But it had to do with a vaccine, the company that had the vaccine, the anthrax vaccine contract. how they had all these vaccines that were basically, they couldn't get FDA approved because their lack of consistency with their product. They couldn't, and they were expiring. That's was the other thing. And then the anthrax thing happened, and all of a sudden a company that almost went out of business made all this fucking money because then everybody was getting these anthrax vaccines. And I guess it was the same lab and the same production. It wasn't the same company because they ended up being bought by I think an English company or German company, but they were the same vaccine that the Gulf War syndrome. Apparently, everybody who took this vaccine who didn't go to the Gulf got this Gulf War syndrome, and the reason why they think it was the vaccine was because people, French troops who went there and didn't get the vaccine didn't get Gulf War syndrome, and American troops who got the vaccine and never went to the Gulf they did end up having the symptoms of Gulf War syndrome. So it obviously is a very sketchy vaccine and the history of it, and so it's quite interesting. But I'm glad people are putting attention on it because I think it's important to look at that, and it's one of those things that we kind of, nobody got in trouble for it. You know, a guy ended up killing himself because he was wrongly accused, and yet, you know, we just brushed that off like it was no big deal. It's like we ruined two people's lives. Well, one literally, and the other one obviously Hartman or whoever. I forget what Hatfield. Yeah. He, I mean, obviously he got accused on national TV and ruined his life. You know, ended up losing his job and all this stuff. And how unprofessional is that? And I think, I mean, what do you think it was? You think it was because they needed to pin it on somebody, and that's what it was? It was a public pressure, or do you think it was all just about trying to find? They knew where the origin of it came from, but they just needed to pin it on somebody, not because of public pressure, but because they just needed to get the attention off where possibly it could have came from.
I think the second thing you said is much more likely. I think the only pressure, I mean, the thing is, there really was no public pressure because, as you said, the anthrax attacks are something that's been largely forgotten. So, you know, even in terms of 9/11, there was public pressure that helped, was instrumental in creating the 9/11 Commission. But if you even remember back to that, there were very few people who were involved in that pressure. They were referred to as the 9/11 Family Steering Committee. I think without their help, without them putting that kind of pressure on the government, we might not even have seen what was actually the 9/11 Commission, which by most accounts is an obvious cover-up and a means to basically just for the Bush administration to cover their own ass, whether that means they were criminally negligent or there was actual things that people in the Bush administration did to actually move away obstacles for the 9/11 attacks to take place. But there was so little public pressure for the anthrax attacks. The only pressure I can think of must have come internally, that there must have been actual FBI investigators on the ground, other government agents involved in the investigation who were actually concerned. I think it's too easy sometimes to see the government as this monolithic entity where they're all on the same page, they're putting out these agendas, and it's all sort of in lockstep. But I think it's good to remember that there are probably some people in the government that are good people that actually think they're doing their job. When they're involved in something like the anthrax attacks. I mean, we already know there were FBI agents involved in that investigation who thought that there were actual hands meddling with the investigation from the very top levels. Government officials were actually trying to steer parts of the investigation, cover up other parts of it. Lots of pressure to put pin the attacks on different people throughout different stages of the investigation. We know John Ashcroft and other people from the Justice Department were basically strong-arming people in the FBI to pin the attacks on Al-Qaeda at the very beginning. The connection to Saddam Hussein got leaked out later on. That was more like filtered out through anonymous government leaks, and that sort of spread that way through the media. And then you have other people like Judith Miller, who have extremely questionable journalistic ethics. Let's just say that at the most polite way. Who was actually working on a book, a hysterical, fear-mongering book about bioterror that literally got released like a few days before the anthrax letters even landed. So you have this person who was basically who had martyred herself for the Bush administration, who had stayed in prison because she didn't want to rat out the person who leaked Judith Miller's name to the press. That same woman was instrumental in helping basically put out this idea of bioterrorism, linking it to Saddam Hussein, to Al-Qaeda, and magically the book came out right before the attacks. Is that coincidence? It's very interesting. And also Judith Miller was involved in something that, has almost become a concept that has been brushed aside because of how many crappy conspiracy theories have perpetuated the internet for the last few years. This idea of mock drills or staged operations, those actually used to, our government has done things like that, and it's all on record. One of those things was called Operation Dark Winter, that took place, I think it was about 6 months before 9/11. Operation Dark Winter involved members from the Bush administration and the Clinton administration, including the former CIA director, James Woolsey. Judith Miller played the part of a news reporter in this drill. It was a multi-stage drill that was essentially a mock bioterror attack on the U.S. government and journalists in this country. There's so many eerie parallels in this mock drill, Dark Winter, to the actual anthrax attacks. It makes you wonder, what is the connection there? There's too much of a connection for it to be merely a coincidence. Again, I'm not saying that means that the people involved in that drill were behind the 2001 anthrax attacks. I'm just telling people to look at that and to see it for what it is. This is not some batshit Sandy Hook truther conspiracy theory. This is very possibly high levels of our government attacking our own country with a biological weapon in order to sell a war. And there were many other facets of selling that war. The aluminum tubes, the idea that Saddam Hussein met with Mohammed Atta in Baghdad, the idea that Saddam Hussein had a secret nuclear weapons program. If you remember back to leading up to the Iraq War, almost all of those rationales fell apart leading up to the war. Judith Miller was instrumental. The whole Judith Miller affair, Valerie Plame was sort of one of those facets that got sort of debunked before the war started. The idea that someone from Iraq was trying to procure uranium in Niger. But the anthrax attacks were a real thing that happened in this country. And it allowed the U.S. government and all these neocons to make this vague connection, because it was a real thing that people were scared of, to Saddam Hussein. And they never said directly, Bush never went on TV and said Saddam Hussein is behind the anthrax attacks. They didn't need to do that. They just needed to allude to it. And them alluding to it and putting out all these vague connections to Saddam Hussein, I think was enough to push it over the edge, and was really all the public needed, that extra push into complete hysterical, going along with the war. And if you think about it, the Congress and the Senate voted overwhelmingly for the Iraq War. Most Democrats did too. And I think that was partly because the actual government buildings, the Senate was attacked by anthrax, which also obviously helped pass the Patriot Act, and that's a whole nother angle of it. So it's incredibly disturbing. It's fascinating to me as we get closer to this era where we're always constantly saying that Russia assassinates political dissidents, Russia does false flags in their own country. Here we are with what I would describe as a gaping, festering wound of a very open, very provable case that someone in the highest levels of the U.S. government attacked this country with a biological weapon. And yet everyone just wants to talk about Russia, being this crazy, evil country that's willing to kill its own citizens. And yet here we are living in the biggest empire on the planet, kind of just imagining, and basically under the delusion that everything's fine here, that our country would never do anything like that. We're too good. We're too moral. So I find that very interesting moving into the future, how, we keep painting Russia and all these other countries as being these totalitarian, draconian states that kill dissidents. But I mean, you can count many people here who have been mysteriously killed, not just here in the UK, also, pretty clearly because they fought against the power structure. David Kelly in the UK is a really good example of that. There are still a lot of people in the British Parliament who thinks that he was murdered. And when they suspect that, they don't mean that he was just murdered by some random thugs. They mean that the highest levels of the UK government probably took him out.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think our problem is perspective. Like we only see things from our perspective, and we talk about things like you said, like Russia does or other countries do. But I mean, if any other country did some of the stuff we do, like invade countries, put drones flying over the heads of civilians, kill people that are at a hospital, and like we did recently in Afghanistan. I know in Yemen years ago we killed a wedding party. I mean, if any other country did this, it'd be front page of every newspaper. It would talk about how they can't do this, and there would be all these human rights issues and conversations. And when we do it, it's just like we brush it off and it's no big deal because we assume that at least it's because it's trying to keep us safe. But it's like, it's like that saying, one person's freedom fighters, another person's terrorists. And that's exactly it. I mean, we're brainwashed, and on Veterans Day, this is a perfect time to have this conversation. We're brainwashed to believe that we're sending people off to fight for our freedoms when really that's not the case. And we're terrorizing people. And to think that the people who died in that hospital or the people who died in that wedding party aren't forever going to hate us and we're not single-handedly creating terrorists, that's fucking naive. And I think it's this problem with perspective. We only see things from our perspective. We couldn't even imagine a world where, like Yemen, I think it was Vice that did an article about how they're afraid of clear skies because that's when the drones come out. And I mean, we couldn't even imagine living in a world like that. And yet that's their everyday life, and it's surreal. And our short-term memory, we have awful long-term memory where we forget that Iraq was a mess. We took somebody out of power, it became a mess. What the hell do we think is going to happen in Syria? Okay, so we're going to take down their government, and then it's going to be a mess. And so it's insane. And then it's funny how U.S. politicians and people in the public are angry about Russia bombing ISIS. But so it's okay for us to bomb ISIS in Iraq, but it's not okay for Russia to bomb ISIS in Syria. Well, why do you think that is? That could be because some of those, ISIS people that Russia's killing are the same people that are helping take down the government of Syria. So that's the only reason we're upset about it. So, because a lot of them are the freedom fighters that we're giving weapons to, which is another thing that's just insane. It's funny how we just eat this shit up because it's like, oh, we're just giving weapons to the moderate, fighters, the freedom fighters. It's like and I'm like, well, how do you quiz them? Is it a written test? Is it a verbal, like what do you do? You think anybody's going to be like, oh, I'm extremist, you shouldn't give me a weapon? Like, that's insane. It's our taxpayers' money, and then we're talking about how we can't afford Social Security for any longer, and we can't, it's like, what about all this reckless spending that we throw overseas for conflicts that we caused, and maybe we do have a hand in cleaning up some of it, but most of the time we're not cleaning it up, we're making it messier. So it gets to a point where it's just like, shouldn't we just get the blood off our hands and maybe find a way to get a bunch of countries involved and not be the ones who are, and then I guess this all goes back to intentions. Are our intentions really to stabilize anything, or just completely keep things destabilized so we can continue this cycle of spending money on weapons and controlling foreign resources and all this stuff? So, but yeah, it's insane. I mean, it's insane how if our country if we lived in another country and U.S. was a foreign country doing the things they do, our perspective on them would be completely different. And that's why you meet people from other countries, and their perspective usually isn't very positive on the U.S. because most of the time when you don't live in the U.S., you get better news. I mean, my parents who watch the Portuguese channel, or my Russian friends who watched Russian news, or whatever, my Spanish friends that watch Spanish, they seem to get more accurate information on what's going on in the world than people who watch American news. And to me, that's crazy that we live in a country that we know less about what's going on in this country than people who live, who watch news from outside this country. So yeah, it's just one of many, many issues. But that's why I think 9/11 is one of those things where it's hard to let go, and because I think it was, at least for our generation, it seemed like it was the beginning of this, of this mess that we find ourselves in, and it was the justification for this mess. But I find myself struggling with being grouped in this 9/11 truther thing. Like it drives me crazy how quickly people will just call you a truther, like wanting to know the truth is a bad thing, and just it's become a bad term because it just groups you all in with all these people who might believe things you might not even agree with. But if you believe that there's something more to the story besides the official story, then all of a sudden you're a truther, and you're grouped in with the people who think they use Tesla's technology to shoot down the Twin Towers and all this other stuff, which, I mean, I'm okay with questioning things because I've been wrong in the past where I'm like, no, that doesn't, I don't know if that's a conspiracy, or I don't know if I believe that alternative view, and then I end up being wrong. So I mean, it's hard for me to say anybody's a lunatic or crazy for assuming anything, because I'm constantly learning new things, and even things in history that I learned that I've been completely wrong with what I thought I knew. So, but at the end of the day, I think it taints. I just had Lionel on. I don't know if you know Lionel from Lionel Media. Yeah. I had him on, and he was we were talking about Alex Jones, and he's obviously goes on the Alex Jones show and stuff like that. And I was saying how even though he does some good for the movement, because I think he influenced a lot of people like myself, but I think he does some bad, and I guess some would be understatement. He does, because I think he connects so many dots, and he made, even, and I give him credit. He was one of the first people to call out 9/11. He was one of the first people to, anything that he's anti-official story, and he'll be the first one to jump to it, and he doesn't care if people look at him like he's crazy, because maybe he is. but it's one of those things where I think he does some good because he does have the balls to do that stuff. But I think he hurts the alternative view movement, and the alternative news and the alternative media, because now somebody like your sister Abby, or yourself, or myself, who also doesn't believe the official story, we get all grouped into the Alex Jones group, And I think we have to break these borders and look at it like, no, let's look at everybody's ideas and look, because I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people who don't believe the official story, and you don't agree with all of them, and you don't agree with their view, their alternate story you might not agree with. So why should you be lumped in with everybody who has this alternative view? So I think, it's hard. I had Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson on, who was Chief of Staff for Colin Powell, and we briefly talked about 9/11, and even I found myself restraining myself from getting too far into it, because I'm like, because my personal views about what really happened was I was urged to jump out and be like, no, that's not what happened, and and getting in this, but then I'm like, and then he's not going to respect me.
Well, it's interesting you bring him up, because Paul Jay of Real News Network kind of asked him if he thought that anybody in our government allowed 9/11 to happen, and his answer was no, because if he thought that, he would not be able to live in this country anymore. And I thought that was an interesting answer, because it reflects what I would perceive as almost like sort of like a shield, a security blanket. Like, not that he's unwilling to go there, he just wants to live here. He doesn't want his image of America to sink that low.
Yeah, I saw that interview, and that I think the way he answered that probably is what probably
it's telling.
Yeah,
right?
It's telling, and it's almost like I'd rather not know than know.
That's was my thought on it too. Yeah, it was, but I don't even know if you were aware of this. He's actually the one who wrote that speech for Colin Powell when he held up that anthrax vial at the UN.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and one of these days I really want to ask him what he thinks about the anthrax attacks, because he seems like he was willing to touch his toe in the water about 9/11 in a little way. So something like the anthrax attacks, he remembers it. He helped write the speech that greased the skids. That was, in my opinion, the slam dunk for them to actually get us into war. Even though the UN, we eventually defied the UN, it was sort of like the public appeal. That UN speech was sort of like the final public appeal, for public support for the war. And I know he regrets writing it. He said that, but does he know about all the anomalies and the strangeness revolving around that attack? I'd be really curious to find out, because I feel like someone like him is probably one of the most valuable defectors from the Bush administration that's out there right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm really interested to what things he'll say in the future. I mean, even the things he's saying right now about Russia and the neocons are pretty much straight on target. I included a bunch of an interview he did in part 2. It's sort of intercut with the escalation of the rhetoric here against Russia, the new Cold War rhetoric. And he says some really, really cutting, really true things, and there's not enough people like him out there saying those kind of things. So it's interesting to me that he's not getting more media attention.
Yeah.
Because of some of the things he's saying, I would describe as very controversial, but they're not. It's not controversial to you or me, but to the general public. So I'd really like to see more people asking him questions and talking to him.
Well, as a guy who considers himself a Republican, I don't see him on Fox News ever, and that's probably
exactly, yeah.
Which is interesting, because I mean they'll have any Republican on there, but that's the thing that's kind of weird, because he considers himself a Republican, like he still wants to be true to that party, but yet everything he says sounds anti-Republican. It's like or at least I shouldn't say anti-Republican, but at least it doesn't fit in with the opinions of most Republicans today, and he's very outspoken about his issues with foreign policy and stuff like that, and that's what I loved about him. I couldn't believe that somebody who was in the inside would speak this freely about it. And but you should have him on Media Roots. I mean, if he comes on my show, he'll definitely come onto your show and talk to you and Abby. So he definitely, and you guys are much.
I'll
more,
try. Yeah.
Yeah, I could give.
I didn't even consider it. I just assumed he would probably decline. I mean, yeah. If you have any contact of a representative, dude, pass it on. I would love to.
That's the cool thing about this podcast world, is that we all help each other out. And like Jen Briney, I had Jack Abramoff on my show, and she was talking about how she would like to get. That'd be a cool conversation. I'm like, I'll give you his information. I'll let you know how to get a hold of him. And even this guy, Boki Nakbar, I helped him get like Dan Carlin on. So, but a lot of guys help me out, because people like yourself and James Corbett and Daniele Bignelli and Jason Burmis and all these people who initially came on, Douglas Ruskoff, who were my first, a lot of them were my first initial guests that came on. Like, they didn't have to come on. I could have been a dude who in my mom's basement did like 10 podcasts and like, it's too much work. I want to eat Cheez-Its and play Call of Duty, And so, it was nice enough for people to come on. So I feel like I feel more than willing to help anybody out, because I think I've been helped out a lot. So, but yeah, I think that'd be awesome, because you and Abby are much more knowledgeable in a lot of these topics than I am. So I think you guys would have an awesome conversation. So I'll tell you, you might be very surprised, because I was very surprised that he'd be willing to come on my show. I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, he said yes. So I was kind of surprised, but yeah, I mean, that'd be an awesome conversation. And like you said, I think he's a very important asset, because of the fact that he wasn't somebody in the outside speculating, but he's in the inside, and he's seen probably a lot of shit that he probably isn't talking about, but it has some influence on his opinions and perspectives. So I think that he's a really interesting guy. But yeah, like I was saying before, even with him, I found myself a little afraid to touch that topic or to go too far into detail with it, because of being grouped in that thing. And I mean, one thing I love about you and Abby is that you guys are wicked outspoken, and I thought about it afterwards. I'm like, I know some people who would have just fucking said something, right, and I tiptoed around it. But I know people like yourself or Abby who would have been like, yeah, this is what happened, and so I definitely am like, fuck, man, I shouldn't have been a pussy. I should have said something. But
well, we're all in that. I mean, I do, I have to restrain myself sometimes too, depending on what guest I'm talking to. I don't know what page everybody's on when I'm interviewing them. Yeah. So like, what I'll do is I'll put the question out there in a way where it's kind of I'm not necessarily saying, oh, I believe this, what do you think about this?
So your perspective might not be clear while you ask
the
question. Yeah.
Or like, I'll just ask a general question, like, what did I ask? I mean, there's a lot of talk right now about this idea of organizations like the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Like they shouldn't be taking money from groups like Google. So when I talk to people sort of in the privacy scene, political scene, we've interviewed a few people. I'll pose that question to them, and I'm not going to say, "Oh yeah, that's fucking those fucking hypocrites, Electronic Frontier Foundation. What do you think of those bastards?" I mean, I try to come at it more from like, do you think there's a conflict of interest there? What's your takeaway from that? And I think it's that's a better way to get people's, to answer honestly. People's defenses go up when they feel like you're coming at it from like this specific fringy place, especially with 9/11. That's the one that gets you boxed in the most. I mean, there are people out there. There are plenty of people out there who, if you ask them a very pointed question about 9/11, or even some of the more fringy things like Building 7 or the buildings, controlled demolition, any of those things, they'll have an honest conversation with you about it. But there are, I'd say, the majority of people who are sort of in the media scene, they have like a protective shield up where they refuse to engage with it, and they already sort of have like a knee-jerk response built in, where like either it's batshit or you're one of those truthers. I don't want to talk about that or whatever. But I don't know. I mean, I think you just have to, like for example, John Gold was interviewing a guy named Philip Shannon, who wrote a book that was highly critical of the 9/11 Commission. He's not a truther. He doesn't believe that the buildings were blown up or anything like that. He's just coming at it from the perspective of the 9/11 Commission was a cover-up, and it was manipulated by the Bush administration.
Absolutely.
And John Gold, asked him point blank, like, do you think there's any possibility that elements of our government were criminally involved in 9/11? And he's like, I honestly don't think there were. But I have thought about it. I have looked there. But I think that's the difference between someone like Philip Shannon and other people, is he's at least open. He's open to the idea. He's not going to be like, oh, that's fucking nonsense. What are you talking about? And I think that's a thing that's harder to avoid. You find less people who don't react like that, I guess what I'm saying. Unless they're truthers or unless they're, in the conspiracy world. But it's...
Yeah, you don't find a happy medium. Yeah, you don't find a happy medium. You either find people that are completely, controlled demolition, Building 7, or you get people who are like, no, I don't. That's crazy. I don't even want to talk about it. And there's not too many people who will sit down and have. And I attempt to. I mean, I've had a lot of people that I'll be like, listen, how about we just have a conversation about things that don't make a lot of sense, and then just go from there. Just give me at least the benefit of the doubt that these things just don't make sense. I'm not saying I know what happened. I'm not saying I have a strong theory on what happened and I know who to blame. I'm just saying that these are the things that don't make any sense, and let's talk about it. And the commission report's perfect. That's why I think 9/11 Press for Truth with the Jersey widows is such an important documentary, because that's not a conspiracy theorist documentary at all. And that's just showing how obvious of a setup the commission report was to fail. And these women weren't conspiracy theorists. They were just women looking for answers and wanting to find out how a country that spends so much money in military and defense could let something like this happen. And they found tons of inconsistencies, and the fact that Henry Kissinger was put on and then eventually taken off because they called him out, and then everything from Bush and Cheney not being under oath when being questioned, and not being they wanted to be together, and all these things, and plenty of people, a part of the commission report, came out publicly and said that it was it was a failure, and it was it was built to fail. So I mean, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's people who looked at the evidence, people who are part of the commission report, which most people will say that's the official story, that's what we should believe. I mean, the people who are part of that are even they are saying that something doesn't make sense, and this seems like it was built to fail, and they weren't really looking for answers. And so, I mean, and then you always get the people who say, oh, well, if it was a conspiracy, then somebody would have said something. Well, yeah, you're right, and people have. And that's
and I just wanted to interject really quick that, like, someone like Rachel Maddow, I think, is a perfect example of someone who has a critical mind. She's smart, she's not an idiot, but she did this really bizarre, extremely offensive, I mean, blatantly retarded. I mean, I'm just going to say it. a thing on her show where she actually tried to tie the Boston Marathon bombers to 9/11 truth ideology and conspiracy theory culture. And that, if that wasn't bad enough, her trying to imply that truthers or conspiracy theorists had violent, terroristic tendencies or whatever. She then went on to say that one of her favorite books is the 9/11 Commission report, and she held it up on the screen. And I was just thinking, are you an idiot? Like, do you understand that the person who wrote this book is an absolute neocon, Bush pawn, Philip Zelikow, one of the principal authors of the book, who, by all accounts, was in charge of the investigation, decided what went in, what didn't go in. That's the exact words from, I think it's Kristen Breitweiser, maybe, who said that. And that's been proven. We know that. Philip Shannon has uncovered that in his book, that they basically hired a literal, history revisionist, a neocon, to be in control of one of the most important alleged criminal investigations of all time. I mean, that in and of itself should make you not trust it. Just coming from the perspective of a democratic liberal as herself, why would she be so trusting of a document like that was directly manipulated by the Bush administration? To me, it's actually quite shocking, and I think illustrates just how far people knee-jerk against this idea of being a truther or this idea of being a conspiracy theorist. They knee-jerk so hard at it that they actually put themselves in a disadvantage mentally. I mean, she's literally she's lowering her own intelligence and critical thinking abilities because that's how much she's repelled by the so-called truth movement or conspiracy theory culture. But I've noticed another problem too, and you and I have talked about this before, is that it also comes from within inside the so-called 9/11 truth movement. I'd say most people in the movement see a movie like 9/11 Press for Truth as some kind of what they call a limited hangout operation, where they actually believe Ray, the filmmaker of 9/11 Press for Truth, is some kind of disinformation agent, and then he's putting out things to take away our focus from the real, meat of the 9/11 theory.
People have actually said this?
Oh my God, man! When 9/11 Press for Truth first came out, people were trying to ruin it within the community. It actually got more criticism from within the 9/11 truth movement than outside. It's very
crazy.
Interesting, actually. Arguably, let's just put this theory out here, because it's a theory I like to talk about, but it's not something I can prove. Let's just assume that the 9/11 truth movement had things within it that were true and that could threaten or potentially undermine the 9/11 official story. It would behoove of the government to actually insert disinformation and create a divide and conquer mentality within this movement in order to weaken it and basically make it impotent and unable to function and carry to its inevitable conclusion of getting a new investigation or whatever. I would argue that that mentality was very early on in the truth movement and started to separate and create these sort of weird infighting camps from the very beginning. And I mean, I still talk to people who think that, I get accused of being some kind of disinfo agent or shill simply because I don't, because I have things that I've pulled from the 9/11 truth movement, or, true things that I consider factual, and that most people, if they saw them without being associated with the movement, would probably see them as factual. Because I've only used certain things and not everything, like I don't always go out there and talk about Building 7 or whatever, people say that I'm some kind of agent, or that I'm somehow some kind of disinfo peddler. And that's really fascinating to me, is now I'm in that position. So basically what's happening now is anybody who does original research in the so-called field of 9/11 truth or investigation, who doesn't parrot or echo sort of these traditional touchstones of, if you don't promote Richard Gage, if you don't promote Building 7, if you don't promote the Larry Silverstein clip where he's supposedly talking about pulling the buildings, then you're a traitor, you're a shill, you're a sellout. And to me, that's in some ways if not equally, more damaging than the way the public perceives new investigations into 9/11, because it makes people coming into the movement now be like, oh, well, this movement is full of a bunch of insane dogmatic people who aren't actually open-minded. They're already stuck on what they already believe. They're not willing to look at anything new. I mean, even, the whole nother angle of it is this: there's a whole nother side of the 9/11 truth movement that's very aggressive, which is sort of the Israel did 9/11 fringe part of the 9/11 movement. And that's a fascinating one too, because what happens is all those people will jump on you now if you don't talk about Israel all the time in regards to 9/11. So there's all these different sides and camps fighting each other sort of for the narrative, and we're all it's just all cannibalizing, the whole movement, to the point where I think the movement in and of itself can never be effective anymore. It has to basically be people who are coming at it from new angles and doing original research. And whether those people are, going to some of the more far out territories like the buildings, that's fine. I just think that people who are doing that need to be coming at it from new angles, because the angles that we've already been using aren't getting anywhere, and they're very easy, I think, to brush aside and debunk. Even at this point, someone like a group like Architects and Engineers, I don't know how much traction that's going to get at this point. I'm not against it. I think that it's, if they make ground or whatever, that's good. But I think I see the movement as pretty much completely destroyed. And I think really the only hope we have at this point is just to come at it from new angles, and remind people of the kernels of actual truth from the truth movement, or even bringing up things like the Afghanistan war. I've tried to do this a lot with people, just asking them what do you think about the Iraq war? Was that amoral? Was that just? Most people would disagree that was an immoral war. We shouldn't have waged it. It wasn't a defensive war of any kind. It wasn't a just war. But if you put the same question to most people about Afghanistan, most people would say that it was in retaliation for 9/11, and they would say it was mostly just. It was okay. But really, why? I mean, why does the official rationale for Afghanistan still hold up today? And I really don't think it does if you actually spell it out and you sort of repeat to yourself in your own head what we were told about why we invaded Afghanistan. And I think if more people looked at that, they would, and that's not a truther thing either. That's just to me a reality thing. Why is this other war never questioned? And I would argue that also leaves us at a disadvantage, because that got so associated with trutherism, I suppose, this idea that Al-Qaeda was entirely fake, et cetera, that people, regular people now can't face the morality of that war and see it as another completely immoral, unnecessary war that was, not based in justice or anything. So I don't know. I've gone off on a total rant about 9/11 truth movement, but I mean, yeah, I don't know how much more there is to say about it, because it's like, I think the first step, like for someone like you and me right now, trying to get people to open their minds to it, is the first step is to accept that the movement itself has cannibalized itself, and also a lot of it is very bad info. A lot of it is disinfo. A lot of the people who are going around saying things about it are crazy or don't seem mentally all there. That's true. I can't deny that as someone who's been in and out of various parts of the movement. And I think once we sort of accept that, and also accept that in a lot of ways we've lost the ideas, like the battle for ideas, the public more or less has rejected 9/11 truth, or at least that's a perception that's been put out there. I feel like it's somewhat manufactured, meaning that I feel like it's like it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. All these media organizations started talking about, look at how crazy all these truthers were and whatever, really, when not very many people even knew what it was at the time. Most people, when they started reading these articles smearing the movement, probably didn't even know what the fuck it was. They probably just like, oh, what is this? Oh, these people I'm supposed to think these people are crazy. So that's not completely related. But what I'm saying is that I think that the first step is admitting defeat. And basically, like in any war, we've lost the battle, but not necessarily the war. And if you have a losing battle and you're defeated, you need to basically re-strategize and regroup. And I think re-strategizing is the most important thing. And I think that gets lost on a lot of truthers because they'd rather just go out there in this self-indulgent fashion and just constantly repeat the same memes that we've been hearing for the past 7 years. And it's just like, this is not helping things. It's not showing, maybe it's only helping in the sense that exposing it to people who have never heard of it before. But I think at this point, most people have at least heard about it, or heard something about it. So I think people ought to be careful, and we all have to be honest about where the 9/11 truth movement is now, and what we can do to basically reinvigorate the idea of questioning official doctrine, just in a general sense, without being labeled a conspiracy theorist. Yeah. They've been trying to do it, even past 9/11, calling people who question the Bin Laden death story deathers. So it's like a variation on truther or birther. Where does that come from? It again comes from truther. So, they've tried many times to sort of ingrain this idea that the entire truth movement is a bunch of crazy lunatic, or people who live in their mom's basement and, whatever. And I just think we need to admit that and try to figure out a way to move past it. Anybody who's passionate about this issue, anyone from the most, dyed-in-the-wool, controlled demolition conspiracy theorist, all the way to someone who's just, interested in looking at the 9/11 Commission and finding new angles of that. So, yeah.
I completely agree. But I think what we really have to start asking ourselves is why did we end up questioning 9/11? And if the reason is because we're critical thinkers and we don't want to just, I guess, accept any fact as fact or any information that we're given as the only piece of information, then if that's the type of thinking that led us to 9/11, or at least questioning 9/11, then that type of thinking shouldn't end even after we question 9/11. The same way that we question the official story, and the reason why we're questioning 9/11 is because there's things that don't make sense or whatever. That type of thinking, that theory of question everything, should continue even when it means alternative views on 9/11. And that means that you don't have to agree with everybody who says that this is what happened on 9/11 or that's what happened on 9/11. Or, if you agree with one person on one certain theory, then it doesn't mean you have to agree with them on all the other theories. Even you and I, we might not agree on what we think might, obviously we don't know what happened, but what we think might or could have happened. But that's okay, as long as we're both saying, hey, based on the information I have, this is my theory, or I guess my opinion, and based on the information you have, this is your opinion. And that's okay, and I think that's what we need to do. We have to stop, like you said, it's dogmatic, and once we become this cult of people who just blindly go along and become sheeple and just, like you said, building 7, and and that's fine. If you truly believe that, that's fine. But as more information comes in, be okay with changing your opinion. There's nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't mean you agree with the official story. It just means that you're not sure what the alternate story is yet. And I think that that's something we really have to take in consideration, is the fact that the same way, and I think a lot of people who look at conspiracies and look at alternative history or alternative, obviously, historically, we've been lied to about a lot of things. Foreign policy, we've been lied to about a lot of things. Obviously, even attacks like this on our homeland, we've been lied to. You look at everything from JFK to Vietnam to the reason we went to Iraq, we've been lied to. So it's not, I guess, out of too crazy to think that we're possibly lied to with what happened on 9/11 and what the official story is. So we can come to the agreements on that and just agree that, okay, obviously, I always say this. I'm like, the government's like that girlfriend who keeps cheating on you, and then you keep thinking like, okay, she's telling the truth this time. No, if she keeps cheating on you, you're eventually gonna be like, you're guilty until proven innocent, because you've been guilty so many times. And that's how we should look at the government. Like, they should be guilty till proven innocent, because they've been guilty so many times, you know. So, but to go back on the 9/11 thing, I think that, you know, a lot of us, once we go in this rabbit hole of questioning everything, I think we should continue that rabbit hole and not get to the point where we only question official stories and we don't question alternative stories, but we should question everything, and even our own beliefs and why we believe those things. And are we possibly a part of a group that feels good, and now it's nice to be a part of something, or it's nice to feel like I know something that other people don't know? And what are these internal motivations? And really ask ourselves, like, are our intentions to get to the bottom of this, or at least shine some light on some things that don't make sense? Or is it just to, you know, I guess, get in confrontations with people, or pretend we know what happened and make everybody else feel like they're dumb because, no, that's not really happened. I know the truth with a capital T. And it's just, you know, and I think that's
where, like, the emotional catharsis angle, like, it feels good to feel like, you know, all these secrets and nobody else does, or, you know, you can show everybody, this is how it really is, you know.
Yeah, and I said that with Lionel, with I use a similar theory with Lionel with music. I was saying how 9/11 is almost like, you know, when you have a band, or you know of a band, an underground band, before they make it, and you have these personal connections to them because that's your band, nobody knows them yet, and you feel cool because you're the one introducing everybody to them, and then once they're popular, then they're not cool anymore, you know. So it's important to feel like, oh no, I know something you don't know. This cool band that you don't know anything about yet, you know, these guys are doing some revolutionary shit. So I think that it's the same type of thinking, and I think that pattern is dangerous. I think that it does end up eating itself. I think it's counterproductive, and I think that we have to be okay with even questioning people we agree with. I mean, you've talked to a lot of people, you know, throughout your career. I've talked to a lot of people, and there's about nobody I can say that I agree 100% with everyone, their views on every topic, and that's okay. It doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean I'm wrong. We have to be okay with disagreeing, even with the movement that we feel the closest to, or we were fans of. You know, I think it's okay with disagreeing with certain things. You know, you don't necessarily have to be anti-vacciner and anti-climate change is just for, you know, to tax people. It's all a hoax. There's no such thing. And also, I mean, like, all these things get, you know, and chemtrails, and, you know, this and reptilians, and everything gets lumped in together. And it's like, no, you don't have to check off the box. Yes, I believe in this, and check off every box. You can look at every issue differently and look into it and come up with your own conclusion. But I think that a lot of times it's this, I don't know if it's this tribal thinking where we're still these tribal hunter-gatherer monkeys who want to be a part of groups, and then it's a good feeling being a part of a group, and so I don't know what it is, but it definitely, it's dangerous. And I think that we have to look in the mirror and be like, why am I pushing this? Why am I motivated? What's the purpose of me spewing all this and getting in confrontation with people? Is it because I really care about us going into another war based on false pretenses, or is it because I just want to feel cool that I have the truth with a capital T, and you don't know it, and you're wrong, and I know that this is all a hologram and we're in the Matrix and you don't? You know, it's just one of those things where it makes you, I think we lose track of what motivates us. Because one thing that drives me the craziest, one thing that really touches me is, and being on, you know, obviously it's Veterans Day, one thing that I think emotionally really bothers me is that when I see people who, you know, you look at the numbers of veterans who committed suicide after, you know, the Afghan and Iraq war, guys who are dealing with PTSD, guys who have lost their limbs, guys who are, you know, who have passed away, or even the ones who are alive who will never ever be the same. And these people have to live their lives in some type of struggle, either mentally or physically, or in some type of pain, mentally or physically, and all for a war that we all agree now that, oops, we fucked up. And it's like, yeah, the politicians who made those decisions and pushed that war, they get to move on with their lives, but these people can't, and these families who lost loved ones can't. And that should be our motivation, because when you see stuff like that, I mean, that's the stuff that bothers me. Some of the stuff that bothers me the most is when I see these poor kids who join the service and their heart's in the right place. They truly believe that they're going overseas because they're fighting for just causes, and they're protecting their loved ones at home. And who doesn't want to do that? I mean, you have to assume they're just not well informed, and it sucks because once you sign you sign that dotted line and you're their bitch. Whatever the fuck they ask you to do, you do. And you don't have a option on or don't have an opinion on if it's for a just purpose or an unjust purpose. You don't have that option. You become just one of their tools that they can use to for whatever incentive they have to get involved in certain conflicts. And so that's the stuff that really bothers me. And that's why 9/11 was so important to me, because of the fact that there's so many people who their lives will never be the same. Either you lost them in an attack, or or they're a veteran or whatever, and taxpayers' money that went to all these private contractors like KBR and Halliburton and all these people. So much of it was being subbed out. And there's actually a good episode of American Greed where it was like, I think it was two sisters who had a company that was shipping things out for the military to Iraq for the military during the war, and they accidentally wrote an invoice wrong and put like a couple extra zeros. So I'm making up this number, but it was, instead of being like a grand, it was like 100 grand, and the government just paid it, and they just continued doing that. They kept just writing these ridiculous invoices, and the government kept paying it, and eventually they did end up getting caught because they got greedy and didn't stop. But when I saw that, it was eye-opening of how recklessly we just spend taxpayers' money. Like the rest of us, there's people out there who are struggling to pay their bills, struggling to find food, to be able to save some money to buy some quality food and to pay their bills and rent and all that stuff. And then we just recklessly throw money out to private contractors like that without ever really keeping track of it and knowing where it's going or who's profiting from it or their links to politicians. I mean, it's insane. And that stuff, I mean, I don't know about you, but emotionally that shit bothers me. And I think that's the stuff that, I mean, all these things, all these different topics we're talking about, these things just rub me the wrong way, and it pisses me off and it bothers me. And I'm one of those people that if I see somebody who's struggling, somebody who's handicapped or somebody who has PTSD or somebody who has lost a limb, like my heart goes out to them. And I very much feel their pain, and I'm like, I turn into a wuss, and I'm just like, oh my God, that poor person, and then it motivates me to want to continue these shows and talk to people like you who are doing such a great job keeping these conversations alive and sparking thought and conversation. And really, I know a lot of times people in the alternative media and alternate news, they talk about, well, you're talking about it, but what are you doing? And it's like, what, we can't do anything, and it's just, well, I think just talking about it is doing something. And even if you're one little the only thing you contribute is talking and sparking conversations with loved ones and friends and stuff like that. I think that's important, because I think too many people would rather just say, you know what, fuck it, I know it's all corrupt, I know it's all messed up, I can't do anything about it, I'm just going to go along with my everyday. And I have friends like that. I have friends that are like, Ricky, I can't listen to your podcast anymore because it pisses me off when I hear about these things, because I get so worked up when I hear about these topics that really are out of sight, out of mind in my everyday life. But then you talk about it and I realize how messed up things are. And I'm like, yeah, but that's a good thing. It's a good thing that you get worked up, because hopefully it motivates you to talk about it. And maybe we can't make a difference, but there's a kid right now who's listening to this podcast. Well, not right now because it's not live, but eventually when they download it, they're going to listen to this podcast, and they could be the next politician. They could be the next, CEO of a company, and they could run it, with some sense of morals, So I mean, they could, they are the future, and so I think that we can never take for granted our reach, and especially in 2015 where podcasts, and I mean your podcast, these podcasts get downloaded all over the world. I mean, we're touching people we'll never be able to meet, and who knows what type of everyday life they have and things that they're going through. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So just like yourself, I went on a wild rant and I have no idea what was my point of it. But your opinions on any of that?
I mean, it's amazing how much money is wasted in war, and how it gets into the hands of these people who obviously don't deserve it. And then just a counter example to that, not even a counter example, just like a sad example of what you're talking about is in Iraq when the first, after the first bombings, the shock and awe bombing campaign, the U.S. government's strategy for getting Saddam's army to turn on him and to getting them to surrender was through cold, hard cash. And they were literally shipping in pallets of, like, entire pallets of cash, $100 American dollars, in military airplanes. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's not a urban legend. There's actually photographs of some of it. And they were literally distributing this money to all the different high-up generals, and then those generals are distributing it down to their lower, I don't know the military ranking system fluently, but basically they were using it to bribe all these Iraqi military people. And what happened was there was so much cash and so much unaccountability for this cash. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of American taxpayers' money being distributed in cash, that there was so much of it floating around that they knew that soldiers would be tempted to take it. Of course, a lot of these soldiers don't make very much money. They're trying to support a wife and a kid, multiple kids. Some of them even supporting their parents. So they actually, when they had them like count the money, a lot of it was they had them do it in their boxer shorts, in these closed off rooms, so that their supervising general or whatever would see all these soldiers and they wouldn't be able to hide money in their pants or whatever. But what happened was there was so much goddamn cash wasted in Iraq trying to bribe people that a bunch of it ended up coming home in the form of soldiers secretly pocketing some of it. And if you're a soldier, fuck yeah, you're over there risking your life, and you see the American government being so reckless and so irresponsible with the taxpayers' money. Why not? Why not pocket a stack of 10 grand and take it home to your wife and kid? So what happened was the FBI started actually arresting and indicting regular American soldiers who had come across some of this money, who tried to bring some of it home and deposit it into the banks. One soldier in particular was doing the thing where he was depositing 10 grand in different banks because of the limit. It's like, if you go over 10 grand, a bank has to report it to the government or whatever. Yeah. Eventually he got caught. Some of these people went to jail, but it's just a sad example of how the desperation, you're a soldier, you're already going in the army. If you're poor or lower income, does reflect a desperate, a form of desperation, I would argue, whether you agree with someone's decision to go into the military or not. But then to have them, then get arrested and indicted when they came home trying to pocket some of this cash, it just makes it even sadder, because where'd all this fucking cash go? Did it just go to all these Ba'athist, Saddam's cronies? It's just like, there's just no accountability is what I'm saying, and even you're talking about contractors. Actually it was in this great book. He's not normally known as like an adversarial, radical reporter, but he's, in a lot of ways, he started a lot of what's happening now with the NSA revelations. His name is James Risen. Yeah. He wrote a book. God, I forgot the title now, but it's his most recent book. And it just goes through all these micro examples, real life examples of how fucking reckless and corrupt our government is. Not even just in this global way where it's like, they're like gangsters or mafia, but just in the sense that how many things they just don't give a shit about. And one of the other things he writes about in his book is how a KBR was contracted to do all this electrical work all over Iraq. And in several instances, their electrical work was so shoddy, they didn't even ground the electricity, which, if you know anything about electrical wiring, that's extremely dangerous. No, anybody if you did that here, if you installed electricity in someone's house here and didn't ground it, you can be held criminally negligent if someone dies from that. But it turned out, of course, that in Iraq, these KBR shoddy electrical jobs actually led to multiple electrocution deaths of American soldiers. just hanging out in their barracks. One of them was actually taking a shower. He died from from electrical shock in the shower. His mom was sent a letter home basically saying an internal investigation revealed that your son tried to bring an electric razor into the shower and accidentally killed himself. Complete bullshit, completely made up to cover up the crimes of a major corporation. And all these generals were instrumental in helping them cover this shit up. There was a few people who knew about it who later contacted this mother and said, thank you for continuing to push on this and continuing to, file lawsuits, because if you didn't do this, this would have been completely buried. And it was only because of her passion, because she knew it just sounded like bullshit. I mean, she knew it. Yeah. It just sounded like a bullshit story. Her intuition and her love for her son led to.
I'm not sure electric razor would. I mean, it's batteries most of the time, and even if you plugged it in, I'm not sure you would electrocute yourself to death regardless. I mean, maybe a hair dryer, but electric razor. I don't think that would happen. Because most of the time they're wireless or just a couple batteries. I mean, that's just insane. But. Yeah, that shit drives me crazy. I mean, I know it's an old film, but Iraq for Sale is a perfect example of all the.
Oh yeah.
And I know some people will be like, "Oh, it was the filmmaker was a liberal, crazy liberal," but whatever. My point, I had a buddy once that I recommended that dude. He's like, "Oh, that filmmaker's a liberal," and I'm like, "What's your point? Does that mean that he can't have some good information?" I'm like, "Sometimes I get some information from conservative websites." I'm like, "Sometimes it's productive that they hate the liberals because they might find some information on them that liberal news sites might not talk about." So I mean, you can find stuff from either side, and you can, and that's a nice thing about not having a alliance with either side is that you're not blinded by what political party you usually relate with. But yeah, I mean, that type of stuff happens so often, and again, it's taxpayers' money. And I got in the debate with Thaddeus Russell because I don't know if you're familiar with Thaddeus Russell. He wrote the book Renegade History of the United States, and he's actually writing a book right now on foreign policy. And I think on
is he just would you characterize him as one of these alternative right wing people, or was he not really fall into that?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't really,
like a Gavin McGinnis.
No,
so I'm kind of familiar with some of his work, and
Gavin's a fucking
for some reason he
lunatic.
seems tied into that world, but I don't know why. If it's just because he's
because he definitely doesn't stray away from confrontation, and he doesn't stray away from debate. But I think it's a good thing because he'll have a healthy debate with anybody. And I completely disagreed with him. We had this opinion on, because he's writing a book on foreign policy. He thinks that ideology is the motivation to a lot of our foreign policy, and I think profit is the motivation. And of course, I could be wrong. Like I'm wrong about a lot of things, but personally, I just think that the one thing that brings everybody together is money, and that's why you see countries that don't have the same religion, don't have the same ideologies, work together and trade together and help each other. That's why you see politicians help each other, and people like Kissinger worked with Republicans and Democrats. They didn't give a fuck. I mean, I just don't think it's about ideology, and
tell me what his argument was, because I go back and forth on that actually.
Yeah, I do
sometimes. I mean,
I do too.
I don't know if you. I mean, my movies go. Kind of. It seems to imply that a lot of it is ideology, but well, what is your take? What was your argument with him about? I mean,
I guess
our debate. I should say.
Of course, he made the example of everybody talks about Dick Cheney and how he worked for Halliburton, and then that was the incentive to go to Iraq and Halliburton. And he's like, oh well, Dick Cheney sold all his stocks before he went to. I didn't mean to say like that. I'm like, oh, he said Dick Cheney. And I didn't mean to make fun of his voice like that, but he's actually a really nice guy. But he talked about how Dick Cheney sold all his stocks beforehand, and but. He's also got like some a huge paycheck when he left Halliburton. I forget what the number was, but they gave him some ridiculous going away money, and which obviously you can't say there's no conflicting interests with going to Iraq and the non-bid contracts they got, and then the fact that he worked for Halliburton before that. I mean, I think that's just quite obvious, but he talked about his opinion is that a lot of it's ideology, and I forget who he used. as an example, he was a Christian and he was, this and that. But I don't personally. I just think a lot of time, of course, when it comes down to PNAC and you look at that, yeah, it does look like it's ideology, because it does look like they really truly believe in America being the greatest country on earth. And similar to Thaddeus Russell, that's kind of what he thinks too, is that these people are motivated by, they really believe that America is the best country on earth, and that we should be the world's policemen, and we should decide what's right and wrong, because our moral compass is much better than everybody else's, or it's calibrated much better than everybody else's. And so I think maybe there is some truth to that. And I do go back and forth. And I think in the intro to that show, I even said I wasn't quite sure how strongly I felt even about my own opinion, because you can find almost examples for either argument, and
well, maybe a way to put it would be that it's both.
Yeah.
Robert Kagan is a very good example of someone who doesn't seem to at least have that much of a profit motive, for believing the things that he believes. And in a very heavy agenda, I used a clip where, and he brings up this point a lot, that America blends the two together. They blend self-interested motives and this supposed, as he claims, a humanitarian motive for their foreign policy. So if he's saying that, I think that there's some truth to that there are people who buy into this brainwashing, that we're doing things, we need to do these crazy things across the world for some overall humanitarian goal. And even some of these... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but do you think they're saying that just to get public opinion on their side on why they're getting involved in these things? Or do you think that in some aspects, maybe some of these politicians actually do believe in these, trying to help these countries and trying to make the world a better place and trying to protect the loved ones at home? So, do you really believe that they believe some of this, or because I always felt like it was all for just PR reasons. It was their way of selling certain wars or getting involved in certain conflicts. Well, what's your opinion?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? It's like, how much is it just them knowingly going out and basically perpetuating this PR campaign knowingly, or is part of it them believing it and sort of passionately expressing this view? And I think that's where it becomes confusing, because you could argue that some of these people were maybe indoctrinated with a viewpoint where the actual viewpoint itself comes from a PR campaign, like decades ago. I think that's an interesting way to look at it, because I don't know if you've heard of this. I've been talking about this book on Twitter and just on the podcast for the past few episodes, called Television News and Cold War Propaganda. And the reason I think the book is so interesting is because it's basically the crux of the book is basically asking the same question you just did, which is basically, what is the difference between culture and conspiracy? What is the difference between a PR campaign that's completely manufactured and done for a specific purpose versus people buying into that campaign for years and years or decades and decades, and then believing in that, feeling like it's their own belief?
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Let me read to you really quickly just this. There's a passage from this book that I think is just extremely resonant. It's on page. If anyone wants to grab this book, it's U.S. Television News and Cold War Propaganda, 1947 to 1960, by Nancy Bernhard. And she basically, that's, like I was saying, that's the crux of the book. Hold on, let me read this passage. So she says, in joining forces to sell the Cold War to the American people, government and industry professionals clearly knew they violated precepts of a free and independent press, but they justified it to themselves as a necessary and patriotic duty in a fearsome age. As their patterns of news sourcing became institutionalized and indelible, their work achieved amazing feats of rationalization. When you look at some of their language, it is tempting to attribute to them some conspiratorial mindedness, but these campaigns do not amount to a thoroughgoing conspiracy. Although these people designed public information campaigns to promote particular public attitudes, there was no central plot or direction beyond a system of international interests and shared beliefs. And then she goes on basically to say that if a PR campaign is successful, does that mean the public was brainwashed? Or does that mean that the information in that PR campaign was true? That's when things get murky. How do we know if something feels true, even if it has truth to it, for example? How do we know we're not being indoctrinated to think it by some kind of overarching PR campaign, or even a government governments put out PR campaigns? So I think that's a very interesting dilemma, because it's like, are some of these neocons actually fooled by American propaganda designed by like generations before them, by their like basically people who are exactly like they are now, but from like 2 generations before? And that's actually when it gets kind of creepy, because it's like, are these people dumb enough or just susceptible enough to propaganda that their forefathers have created? And that's a whole nother question I ask myself, what is their motive, And you could, financial, ideological, or even just completely being indoctrinated, are all possible explanations. But I think more often than not, they probably collide together. And you have just a mixture and it's really hard to determine, sometimes I'll even look at some of these neoconservatives and think, are they knowingly lobbying for defense contractors? Like, are they pocketing money from Raytheon? Are they pocketing money from Lockheed Martin? Or are they even long-term government assets who have I don't know if you've heard this term sheep-dipped before, but it's a term used in the intelligence community when you want to sort of, like a spy, someone who's a known spy, maybe who's been outed, sheep-dipping them would mean putting them in a completely new covert identity and then sort of trying to reinvent who that person is. Or even a more simple version of sheep dipping would be someone who's still a government agent, putting on the public perception that they've retired from government, and that they're actually still doing government work now under the guise of a civilian. And I think, I can't prove it, but a lot of these neocon warmongers in these think tanks, a lot of them seem to be like that to me. Like they're doing things that are no different from CIA, PSYOPs, or State Department propaganda peddling. But somehow they're just doing it now in the civilian sector. And someone like Robert Kagan, who I cover heavily in a very heavy agenda, his job for the State Department under the Reagan administration was the information agency, the U.S. Information Agency, whose job was to put out propaganda. So here you have someone who used to work for the government doing propaganda, now working outside of the government doing propaganda. Then a lot of ways it goes to the same ends. It feeds into the same thing. So, it sounds crazy to say that Robert Kagan is some kind of sheep-dipped, information agent still, but what's really the difference? How big is the difference between if he was that and what he actually might be? Just a civilian author, editorialist, think tanker.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's such an interesting question, because I think that certain people, maybe like John Kerry or Obama, who were like anti-war activists and really had a completely different point of view, or at least seemed like they had a completely different point of view, and then eventually they got into power, and all of a sudden Kerry becomes like this borderline war hawk, and I think those type of people, maybe they are motivated, maybe they aren't brainwashed into believing their own bullshit. I think that they know what's going on, but they know that they're either motivated by profit or money, or somebody's whatever it is. But I think that there are people who at a young age they get caught up. They're a young Republican in college, and they're motivated by these ideas, and they read Ayn Rand and believe in this free market and all this stuff. And then I think that they can still help other people's agenda, but not really knowing that what the agenda really is. So you get these, you get what I'm saying? Did that make sense? I think that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you've been following all the Media Root stuff we've been doing for the last year.
I was going to actually ask you about that last call you just did. The
oh yeah.
Call?
Yeah. Let's talk about that in a second. Yeah. No, I wanted to just mention really quickly that what you're just describing, sort of the young Republican person who really believes and who sort of goes, helping this unknowingly as part of some sort of, which is, might be like a long-term PR campaign. I think you can see the difference there pretty easily with someone like, for example, like Eli Lake. He would be what I would describe as a new neocon. He's sort of the new generation of neocons. I feel like he's one of those people that you just described. Like he believes that the things that he's writing about. There are other people who I think are known liars. They're pathological in their ability to lie and manipulate the narrative in order to. It's like an ends justifies the means mentality for them, and I think that there's definitely two different camps of neocons.
Is it similar to like religion, like the priests who honestly believe that Jesus is helping you and all this stuff, and then the ones who are wearing like $5,000 suits, private jets, and like, hey, if you give us $100 today, I'll tell you'll get twice as much in return from Jesus, and like they don't really believe. Come on, So it's like it's the same thing. Like but there's people who probably go see this guy who get brainwashed at a young age and really believe this guy's bullshit. So it's kind of similar, it could be a PR campaign that somebody really falls in love with this ideology and being a part of this group. And next thing you know, they believe it more than the people who probably started this ideology in the first place, or for whatever purpose. So, I think that it kind of reminded me of religion, these. And really, they're all cults. I mean, they all kind of seem cultish to me. Anytime you're part of this group and you feel a part of this group and you feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself and you feel like you have a home and friends and I think that's what gets people so. I mean, I think same thing with the 9/11 truther movement. Same idea, like this cultish idea of like you just like feeling like you're a part of something and having friends that think alike and then you all just reinforce each other's opinions because most of the time these people spend time talking to people who agree with them, and really just reinforce your own ideas, so they don't really have logical, good conversations with people who they disagree with and actually sit down and be like, what, that kind of makes sense. There's none of that. So, I think it's all very, very similar with this type of just cultish, just feeling a part of a group type of mentality. And like I said, it reminds me of religion, just these guys who are just taking advantage of people who really believe, and that could be what's happening in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, it still is hard for me to really figure out, how much of what a lot of this is motivated by. But I think even in the case of the people who are lying, the only reason it's slightly different than the religion example you just came up with is because even the people who are lying, I do think there is an ideology beyond just greed and profit where they're using lies to further an ideology and they're just sort of hiding what that ideology is. Whether for some of them it's Zionism or if other people it's just this idea of like pro-American hegemony and we need to squeeze every last bit of this power that we can out of here, before it's too late. I mean, for a lot of these people, they're looking at it like in this long-term strategic game where, America's in this new era now where if we let go of any of our power, we'll basically be surrendering the position that we've built up this whole time across the world. We need to maintain that position, essentially. And if we don't, so they're looking at things, in the same way that someone would look at a game of Warcraft, except that's how they're looking at the whole globe. And then, then you could, but that's best case scenario. I think that's best case scenario. Ultimately, we don't really know what their motives are. We could deduce it all to something very simple, like that it's just defense contractors finding the best way to lobby, and this is the way they found it, is through all these weird think tanks in DC.
Yeah.
Like Google is the biggest lobbying group in DC now across the board. They beat every single other company. So it's not even that defense contracting companies are really pouring the most money into it. So
technology scares the fuck out of me, man. Like just the power of. We were at dinner the other night. It was me, my wife, and then my friend and his fiance. And she went on Facebook while we were waiting for our food or whatever. And Facebook said, "Do you want to comment on?" It knew that basically where we were, the restaurant we were at, and the four of us were together. Like, it was fucking creepy. I'm like, wait, how does it know we're all together? We could be just at the same place, but not together, Like, it was really creepy. And I just think that it's getting to a point where it's just like, fuck, man, like, we're at a generation where this stuff is weird to us, but the younger generations who grow up with this, like, that's going to be life to them. That's just, they don't know life being any different than that. And that's
having privacy.
Yeah.
Having privacy is not a normal thing for people growing up right now, and that is really disturbing, because once we lose that, we will be giving up a lot of our power. There's a lot of,
and we're a generation away from it, because the younger generation that grew up with the internet and with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all this stuff and Snapchat, they don't even know, they have no idea what privacy is. Like, and they're gonna be so used to this lifestyle and just having all your personal information out there and not really having any personal privacy. It is just, that's gonna be life. And then it's like, how do we stop that? Like, there's no stopping that. It seems like that's like a complete helpless fight that we'll never win. That is this transition from privacy to a lack of privacy, because it just seems like all you have to do is make something the norm, and a younger generation that grows up with it will just become used to it, and then that becomes a norm, and that's it. There's and giving up all your information. Just the fact that you can Google search anything. If you want to surprise your girlfriend with a gift, and you're on your computer looking at some gifts, if she goes, "Oh, can I go on your computer and do something real quick?" Go ahead. And all of a sudden there's ads for the gift you're trying to give her, and now she knows what like, there's no privacy even with things like that, just with all the marketing and, oh, we're just trying to help get you what you need and what you want. It's like, oh, come on, man. Like, I the future seems a little scary, and stuff like that just drives me crazy, because I just think that the younger generation really doesn't know what they're getting used to, and that the world that they're going to live in is much different than the world we lived in, and that it's actually nice to have some privacy. It's nice to not feel like every email you write and you written, and every email you read and every Google search you punch in is being listened to and analyzed and sold. And there's a great video called Free is a Lie. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's all about how Google, the reason they sell their Nexus phone so cheap, and the reason why all these services that you see as free, they're not free. You're selling, you're basically giving up your privacy to have this.
You're the product.
Yeah, you're the product, and your information, your whatever you like, your wherever you're going, all this information, your personal information, that's what's being sold, and so it's this video called Free is a Lie. I highly recommend anybody watch it if they're listening. It's really interesting and eye-opening, and how Google you just become a number. You become, everything's being analyzed. But yeah, so it is scary. What's your feelings on that? You think what do you think the future holds? Do you think it's going to be, in 10 years, 20 years from now, people are just going to be completely okay with just giving up every piece of information, and that's just going to become the new norm? And is it necessarily going to all be used for evil? I think eventually all technology does, that people will take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely I think its intention from the beginning was unethical and evil. Data mining, in a general sense, I think was never done from like a moral or helpful perspective. it's just market research basically, but taken to the next level. And I mean, there's no basically Silicon Valley as a whole originally started as of an arm of the military industrial complex. I mean, if you come down to the South Bay of California, of the Bay Area, which is what people refer to as Silicon Valley. I mean, when you would go there, so let's say 15 years ago, drive through there, most of it would either be indie small computer companies or military contractors, and that's all it was. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. I mean, Lockheed, I think headquarters are in Mountain View. So that's, I mean, the roots of Silicon Valley was an arm of the military. Signals intelligence is sort of like how Silicon Valley got started, which was pre-computers, like method technology basically to jam radars in World War II and things like that. I mean, this is how far back Silicon Valley has been doing this kind of stuff. So, went through this transition, solid state circuitry, the microchip. After all that stuff sort of evolved, which again was a lot of it was driven by military technology. Let's not forget that home computing probably wouldn't exist nearly to the level that it does, and even the internet itself, which they used to call the ARPANET, the internal military ARPANET. It all comes from an arm of the U.S. military. Even now, the main privacy tool that everybody recommends, Tor, which to anonymously browse on the internet, is partly funded by the U.S. government. It's partly funded by DARPA and the Pentagon because they use it. It's useful to them. I'm not saying that it's some conspiracy to entrap dissidents like any person trying to hide their behavior in the United States, but the military uses Tor because it's just as useful to them as anybody else trying to anonymize their trail online. There's government spies, U.S. military operations that require anonymization of the internet if they're in another country, things like that. So the U.S. government wants to actually encourage that form of privacy only when it doesn't, only when if it really benefits them. So it gets kind of murky, because Tor has benefits to people. Good benefits. It protects your privacy, but at the same time, the U.S. government is helping fund it. So, we're in this confusing mess of a situation right now where people distinguish the difference between NSA and Google and Apple as if NSA is really bad, they're evil, and then Apple and Google are actually trying to protect our privacy. And I think that's extremely naive way of looking at it, especially of the era we're living in now. I mean, we're basically living in a corporatocracy oligopoly. It's not fascism in the traditional sense, but corporations in a lot of ways have more power than the actual U.S. government itself. So I think to imagine that Apple is going to wage this noble fight against the NSA or Google is going to fight for our privacy rights is absolutely laughable. I mean, and we've seen basically Google, in some ways more than the NSA or more than any of this other shit, has helped condition the public to let go of their own privacy incrementally. I mean, Google, I can't think of another organization besides Google that has helped that along more. Can you? Or Facebook's another example,
yeah,
but everybody uses Google. There's the difference between Facebook and Google. There are people who haven't gone on Facebook yet, or if they have, don't do anything on it. Almost everybody uses Google all the time. And even just the idea that it saves our search history and you could build a mental map of who we are based on that, to me that's a bridge too far. And look how fucking far we've come since then. I'm saying that I don't mean that in a positive way. I mean in a negative way.
Well, like you said about Google, everybody who has a work computer, they're at work and they have a computer, they can use Google, but they can't use Facebook. Most of the time that's blocked.
Yeah.
So you look at the numbers that use Google, it must be, almost everybody who uses the internet. Which is a ridiculous amount of the population now. So, but before I forget, because I know you wanted to talk a little bit about Rogan and that whole thing. Well, you talked about McGinnis. What's his Gavin? Who's he cannot be a real person. Who was just on the Rogan? He was one of the founders of Vice.
Vice.
Yeah.
Well, he was the co-founder.
The co-founder, yeah.
With Shane Smith. I mean, and he claims that he was the content runner of Vice until he left.
Yeah, I don't believe anything that guy says. He sounds like he's so full of shit. First of all, he purposely says things that are over the top, I think, to get attention. He can't honestly believe the shit that comes out of his mouth. And I don't know how he has a wife who is okay with the shit he says about women. I mean, it's insane. Like, it's just the things that he was saying. I'm like, this guy's a character. I'm like, this is like an SNL skit. This guy is not a real person. He's over the top. And then it was funny because Rogan had two people like that pretty close in I don't know if it was a week apart or maybe days apart. He had the other guy who's a gay
Milos.
Yeah, Milo. Yeah,
yeah,
the gay conservative from the UK. He's another one that I'm like, these guys are fucking, like, these guys aren't real people. These guys are just characters who, and I honestly believe that they're doing it on purpose, that they're doing it to get attention. They're doing it because they like to stir the pot and get people riled up because it keeps attention on them and it keeps them relevant. And, because some of the stuff they say is just completely insane. And, I mean, I think it's interesting that Rogan has people on, because I agree with him. Like, yeah, you know what? You shouldn't have people on that you only agree with. You should have people on you disagree with. So, I think he handled it pretty well by not really taking it that seriously. Except when Milo was talking about religion, and they got in a little debate about that, because it is funny how religious some of these people are. Like, and Milo was just really weird with, and Dave Rubin was kind of, because he's been on my show, Dave Rubin, and I didn't know that him and Jank didn't get along, or at least they kind of butt heads with the way Jank handled the Sam Harris debate. I thought that Jank actually handled it quite well. I actually went back and rewatched it after they talked about it on the Rogan podcast.
I thought Jank was way too polite, honestly, in that interview. If I was in the same room as Sam Harris, I would be so disgusted. I honestly don't even know how. I mean, that's the thing with these people. It's like
he was polite.
It's like, oh, well, so and so won the debate. It's like, why is it even worth debating someone who says shit like Sam Harris? Well, I mean, yeah, he says a lot of intelligent shit that might appeal to intellectuals, but when you really read the core of what he really thinks,
but I don't even think he says, because he uses a lot of metaphors to like explain, like, okay, it's like, I get your point, and then he'll still like use another metaphor. It's like this, and he'll go in depth with it. So he comes up with these creative metaphors, but like, okay, I already get your point. Like, just because you came up with this creative metaphor doesn't make your point anymore, Yeah. And that's what he does. He'll spend all this time with this metaphor, and he's so. I mean, Jank, I thought, handled it quite well. I think every time every time they had a disagreement, he gave Sam Harris a opportunity to respond. I mean, I think it was just nice for him to give him 3 hours, uncut, uncensored, to state his mind. And he never ever cut Sam Harris off or try to manipulate what he was saying. He didn't do anything that seemed dishonest whatsoever. So when I heard Rubin and Joe Rogan say how they weren't that happy with the way they were handling that, I'm like, I think that you're being a little biased, because you guys both like Sam Harris, and that's okay. If you like him, you like him. If you like his opinions and his ideas, that's fine. But I think that to say that Jank didn't handle that, in a professional way, to me, I felt like I'm like, what the fuck am I listening to right now? I'm like, did I have a different perspective on this? I literally rewatched it again, because I'm like, wait, maybe I wasn't paying attention, or I was seeing it from one side, and I was maybe my bias was getting in the way of my opinions. But I rewatched it, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be right down the middle. I don't give a fuck that it's Sam Harris and Jank or who it is. I'm just going to listen. And I thought that he handled it quite well. So I was really surprised by but again, they're both friends of Sam Harris, and they both agree with him, and that's okay. But I think there's something about people, and it's funny because when you talked about briefly about how the group of people who think the Zionists are in fault for everything, and who would, I mean, there's a lot of people who look at you and like, oh, you're the type of guy that doesn't like Sam Harris because you because the way he talks about Muslims and this and that, so you must assume that Jews are to blame for everything, but you're not, and you're just looking at the facts, and you establish opinion based on on that, and so I just think that I wonder how much of it is similar to Henry Kissinger, because Henry Kissinger's book and documentary by Christopher Hitchens, The Trials of Henry Kissinger, was interesting to me because Christopher Hitchens wrote a book in a way that it seemed like he understood that foreign policy a lot of times was for geopolitical strategies. It wasn't what they were selling the public. But and then when we wanted to go to Iraq, he was all for going to Iraq. And I think it was his atheistic views of him disliking people who are very religious, like Muslims, that's what kind of fogged his vision from seeing the fact that this was just another one of those PR stunts to get people into a conflict that we shouldn't get into, and he didn't see it because his hatred for religion, I think, fogged his view from understanding how foreign policy worked. And I hear Rogan talk about sometimes about Muslims and stuff like that, and he seems like obviously him being an atheist, similar to myself, but it seems like sometimes his dislike of religious people can kind of maybe that's why he's a fan of Harris, maybe because he agrees with his atheist views and stuff like that. But when it comes down to foreign policy, that's a whole nother thing. And so he has a PhD, he's a scientist, but that has nothing to do with foreign policy. And that's he's not talking about scientific evidence, he's not talking about scientific theory, he's talking about foreign policy. And that's what people are a lot of times have an issue with him, with his maybe not just foreign policy, but the fact that he seems like he's a little harder on Muslims than he is on Christians or Catholics or Jewish people or whatever, and he seems like he's making them out to be the root of all evil, and completely disregarding the fact that some of our foreign policy could be some of the reason on why there's these extremists, or why there all these unstable countries, and maybe that could have some hand in why there's all these extreme groups and stuff like that. So I just think that he doesn't, and I think that's his debate with Dan Carlin was really good, because Dan Carlin, I don't know if you heard it, but he had a really good debate with Dan Carlin on definitely check it out. It was Sam Harris and Dan Carlin on Dan Carlin's podcast called Common Sense with Dan Carlin. And it's a podcast he does where he just talks about current events. And I'm sure you're familiar with Dan Carlin. He does hardcore history. And the hardcore.
I've heard of it. I haven't listened to it before.
Yeah, it's really good. It's just it's a history podcast. It's really really good. But he does this other podcast because the history podcast takes so long to finish, because he does all this reading of books and stuff like that. That he, in between them, he does this Common Sense podcast where he talks about current events and just talks about his opinion on what's going on in the world and stuff like that. And he had Sam Harris on, and it was funny because I didn't think they were going to debate, because Dan Carlin's very polite and he's very just nice guy, and he doesn't seem like a confrontational guy. But they got in a debate, a very similar debate that Sam Harris gets with a lot of people, and Dan Carlin made a really good point. He's like, you're blaming Muslim, these extremists who happen to be Muslims, you're blaming it on their religion because that's the ideology that motivates them to do this stuff. But he's like, how is it any different than being patriotic or nationalism, or you could blame any ideology. It's all the same. One you're blaming it on religion. The other one Hitler had motivations to do evil things. I mean, he also had an ideology. So it's not necessarily religion. It's ideologies in general that can be dangerous. And I'm probably doing a really bad job of stating the point he was making, because he made it very well. But it's an interesting debate, and to kind of, I guess, talk about religion extremism, like that's the only type of extremism there is, like nationalism and other types of extremisms. There isn't other ideologies that I guess provoke extremism. To me, it is naive, and to think that that's the root of all the issues, and that's the part of the world that needs fixing, and our moral compass is the only one that people should pay attention to, and what we consider right is what we consider right. But even Dan Carlin said, listen, if you put a survey in a Muslim country and say, hey, these are the certain things of your way of life we'd like to change, would you agree that you should change these things? He's like, a lot of them maybe might agree that they like the way they are. Maybe they're okay with praying multiple times a day. Maybe they're okay with, whatever. So it's just like, my point is that we keep thinking that they want to be more like us, but maybe they don't. Maybe in some countries they are okay with their way of lives. Well, of course, I'm not talking about the extreme versions of it, like, Saudi Arabia, but in more moderate countries. And so, it's a really interesting debate. But what's your opinion on all that stuff? I mean, did you pay attention to that Rogan-Rubin conversation?
No, I didn't. But I mean, I've watched enough Sam Harris stuff and read enough of his stuff to know what he's about. And I think, to call him like a pathological stealth neocon would almost be giving him too much credit. I think for all his scientific training and education, I think the guy's a fucking idiot. And part of the reason why is because for someone as supposedly smart and educated as him, for him not to realize that he's continuously going out there and essentially dehumanizing an entire part of the world's population every time he talks about Muslims, would either have no self-awareness, or he would almost have to be intentionally going out there doing that. So, I mean, on one hand, I could say that he is intentionally going out there dehumanizing an entire part of our population and playing on our ignorance and acting like, oh, I actually know what the Quran says, and I actually have studied, the Islam a lot, so I can say these things. I think it's extremely destructive, extremely damaging, very disturbing that a so-called rational atheist would be going out there essentially greasing the skids for us to have less empathy for the murder of people who happen to be Muslim. Just sit and think about that for a second, that is actually what he's achieving in his talks, in his writings. It's making us as Americans think, well, yeah, these people are crazy. The Quran is fundamentally evil and makes people do crazy, evil shit. So I don't really care that bad when, the U.S. bombs this country, because, as long as they get a bunch of ISIS in there, I'm okay with it, because Sam Harris convinced me that these people are, the bane of evil. I just find it very telling when you actually just read. I think when you read his writings, you get a little bit more of an insight into his delusional psychosis, and more so than you do in his like visual debates. Because I think when he debates, he's very good at sort of not oversimplifying, but sort of like obfuscating exactly what he believes. Like when he talks about torture, instead of just admitting that he believes that we should torture people to stop terrorist attacks, he'll come up with these like bullshitty, long-winded metaphors and theoretical examples of why. It's like, just fucking admit that you're okay with the idea of wanting to torture somebody. Admit that you're that psychotic. I would actually respect you more if you admitted that you have psychopathic beliefs and think it's okay to actually torture people. Just admit that. Like, I have more respect for people, like, just for example, someone who's openly bigoted and who forms their beliefs based on that. Like if Sam Harris admitted, yeah, you know what? I don't like Muslims. And Arabs scare me, and this is why I think that. I would be like, you know what? Good for you. You've actually been honest and explain where your beliefs come from. Since he's not doing that, and since he's pretending that they come from this like rational atheistic place, and that he has a duty to point out to the world's liberals, how illiberal Muslims are, I think he's lying. Well, and I don't think it's just because he's dumb. He knows that he is playing on people's ignorance, and he's acting like he has the knowledge. So we don't. No, he's not telling you or I, hey, before you believe anything, I think go pick up a copy of the Quran and read the whole thing, and then come back and talk to me. I mean,
do you think he's too smart for his own good? And what I mean by that is that when a lot of people consider you intelligent and you're considered intellectual, that you almost believe your own bullshit, that you can convince yourself. I forget what the quote is, like the dangerous thing about a smart person and a dumb person, or the same thing between a smart person and a dumb person, they both can convince themselves of anything. And it's it's kind of similar, where if you're really smart, you can come up with metaphors to justify whatever opinion you have, and then it makes sense to you, because it's like, oh, in my head, that's why I believe this, because even when he debated Jank, anytime Jank made a point, he never gave credit where it was due, or he was never like, yeah, no, he would tiptoe around it, and he's like, yeah, that's possible, or yeah, that maybe, he would never say, yeah, you made a good point, that actually makes sense, and then he would just jump right to his metaphor, and he felt, it almost seems like he thinks that you win a debate based on how great your metaphor is, like, if I come up with this great metaphor, then I win, right? It's just like, well, like you were saying, we still get your point. Like, you can spend an hour explaining it in this long metaphor and well put together metaphor, but your point remains the same, and it's simple. It's not hard to understand. So but it almost seems like he can convince himself, like it's his justification for things have been, or he's justified things in his head in a way that he doesn't even realize that maybe he's making emotional decisions and finding the facts to defend it, instead of making looking at the facts and then deciding.
Clearly.
And
I think that's best case scenario, is that he's bought into his own bullshit, and he is sort of rationalizing his own emotional knee-jerk reaction.
Do you think that he is just, so what's the other alternative? You think that he's purposely...
The other alternative is that he's more of one of these Machiavellian stealth neocon operators who knows that by constantly going out there and dehumanizing an entire part of the world that we're currently bombing, helps the war cause and helps this neocon machinery. So that's what he's helping. That's what he's achieving. Now it's up for debate whether he's intentionally doing that or not. He would probably say that he's not, but I don't take him at face value. I don't take anybody at face value who does this kind of horrific shit. And I would describe what he's doing as a horrific, dangerous thing, trying to counter the sort of rise of liberalism in this country, liberalistic thought, and basically making liberals feel like you can't be a real liberal if you don't actively think about and focus on the illiberalism of the Muslim world. And that's an extremely bizarre thing to be pushing on people. It's almost designed to make us, as liberals, and who came from sort of the anti-war scene in the Iraq War era, it makes us sort of, it's a trick. I would describe it as a trick to take our eye off the ball, which is that the American government is doing insanely destructive shit all over the world constantly, not giving a shit about our soldiers, not giving a shit about civilians, and using our racism and ignorance of the Islamic world to perpetuate these things.
And he's helping that.
Yeah, he's absolutely, unequivocally helping that. And it's interesting because he's using a warped definition of liberalism that's not somehow like a universal definition. Basically, he's using the term to mean that you believe that like the freedom should extend to every corner of the earth, and that's okay if you think that. I believe that everybody should be able to be free. Part of me is enticed by that sort of like global liberalistic belief, but then it gets a little worrisome when it gets connected to, well, we have the right because we're morally superior, which is basically saying if you're more liberal than the Muslim world, you're morally superior. We have the right to impose our liberalism on other parts of the world, to impose it through force. And that's where it becomes very dangerous, and where there is a slippery slope between this sort of global outlook of liberalism and that belief that I just described. It doesn't take that much to go from one to the other. And I think that that's what he's playing into.
Have you seen, do you know of the YouTube channel All Time Conspiracy? They did a good little video on is Islam the new communist? And basically they compared how back in the day they used communism for justification to invade every country, and how they use Islam the same way. and I think it's very similar, and it's very much what's going on. And like you said, I think what pisses me off the most about what Sam Harris is doing is the fact that we know that this idea of every Muslim is extreme Muslim, and the Middle East is just full of extremists who are just going around trying to kill people and hate our way of lives and blah, blah, blah. Like, we know that that's just a justification for their foreign policy and what they're really doing. And all he's doing is helping convince public opinion that that's the case. And that's what drives me fucking crazy, because it's like you're a person that many respect. They consider you intellectual. They and you're very good at putting together these beautiful metaphors, and you're changing public opinion. You're helping change public opinion, and you're helping justify these bombings in the Middle East, and these, and it's like, what good have we done? I mean, we've taken down Gaddafi, and Libya's a mess. We've taken down Saddam, and Iraq's a mess. And I mean, I don't understand what when has invading a country ever helped? I mean, we've never been successful in the sense that now it's a democracy and everybody's happy, and so it's just endless cycle of taking down governments, and then another corrupt government comes to power, and then we take them down, and then or a lot of times we put a corrupt government in power. And I know you guys had somebody on who talked about the Congo, and it was a while ago. I think it's an old episode, the Media Roots, but it was really good, and I was really surprised and amazed by how they were even involved in stuff in Africa. Governments in Africa, and so many different governments in Africa. Who's in power and who they help take down and who they help put in power, and who was all this. I mean, it's amazing how many different governments in the world that the U.S. gets involved in with taking down or backing somebody who's more friendly to the U.S. or whatever. And it's just like, we have our hand in everything, and it's surreal. It's crazy to think that so many different governments and countries in the world that are influenced by an outside foreign country, because if that happened here, we'd be irate. If China was helping push some anarchist government, or some just different government than what we have, I mean, we would be fucking upset. And yet we do that all the time, and historically there's plenty of evidence of it, from Iran to Chile to Guatemala to Nicaragua. I mean, just tons of history, factual evidence and historical evidence that we've purposely have taken down democratically elected governments, and people just look at that and just like, yeah, well, it's history. Like, no, the same type of things happen today, and unfortunately a lot of these things will be read in the history books years from now, and will be looked at the same way we looked at what happened in Nicaragua or Iran or whatever. But we need to get smarter and start noticing it when it's happening. And I think that's what we're really bad at, or at least I think that's where most of the public is really bad at, is noticing this shit when it's happening, instead of just looking back and say, yeah, we fucked up with Iraq, but we'll do the same thing in Syria, and people aren't noticing that it's the same thing. And then maybe 10 years from now, we'll be like, yeah, we fucked up in Syria. It's like it's this issue where we don't want to believe it when it happens, and then when it becomes so obvious, but because it's in the past, we can just accept, yeah, we fucked up, and maybe it's different today. Maybe those in power today are different than those ones who made those bad decisions. Maybe those in power today are different than the neocons who wanted to go to Iraq and Afghanistan. But it's not. Yeah. And it's just, it's scary. It is, because I think that it's hard to convince people that we're making the same mistakes over and over again.
Well, I think it's in part because the pendulum, swings so far to each side every time we have a different, like a Republican or a Democratic president in office. I mean, I would even argue what's happening now is almost like a reactionary movement or ideology that's sort of reacting to, or at least it appears to be. I don't even know if I really believe this, but like the Sam Harris's, and even like there's this mentality now where it's like within the liberal, like, journalistic community, I noticed that when the Ukraine thing happened, and then when Syria got more and more weird, less people were willing to attribute a lot of the bad things happening in either of those places to the United States or to United States meddling. And then we almost started to see like a knee jerk against the suggestion that the U.S. was instrumental in the coup in Ukraine. There are some journalists that I used to respect. One of them wrote for Vanity Fair. Her name is Molly Crabapple, who, what did she say? She said something like, "Oh yeah, isn't it selfish of us to think that every time anything happens in the world, it's because of like CIA meddling rather than like a resistance movement like taking over their own government?" That's what she was basically saying about Ukraine. And then after that, I just started noticing a lot of people echoing that, almost acting like it was a conspiracy theory to point out the fucking obvious.
Well, there's a tape. I mean, wasn't there a tape conversation of talking about backing a certain government and the Ukraine? It was a while ago, so I can't remember the specifics.
Oh yeah, it was Victoria Nuland, who was Robert Kagan's wife, who a very heavy agenda is all about Robert Kagan, talking about which members of the opposition government they wanted to get into the real government, assuming and knowing that eventually it was going to topple because it had already reached the tipping point that they had dreamed of for so long. I mean, Ukraine is different than some of these other places because Ukraine has been something that not just Republican neocons have wanted a piece of, but something that old Cold Warrior and Democrats back from like the Clinton administration and even before wanted a piece of too. Ukraine was something where I would argue the liberal interventionists and the neocons sort of aligned in the DC power structure. And I think that's why we saw it tip so quickly. It's like, go back and watch some of the protest footage in Ukraine and in Kiev. It's actually incredible how much equipment and how well prepared these protesters were to fight the police. I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen it. Egypt, Libya, look at any other videos of any other uprising against their government. You will never see one where every protester is wearing fucking body armor, has a wooden pole the size of a baseball bat, like somebody's brought in a fucking van and is like just giving out helmets and body armor and wooden poles to hit people over the head with, to all the protesters.
Yeah, it didn't look like a grassroots protest.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not saying that the United States government went in there with CIA operatives and gave them all that equipment. I'm just saying that a lot of external interests were very instrumental in tipping the balance of that government. And they did everything they could to make sure that it got overthrown because, I mean, it's a chess piece that's very important for geopolitics right now. We don't want Russia to have any more, we don't want to have any countries in the Eastern European bloc that are pro-Russian. We just don't want to have that.
Well, NATO's expanding east, and Russia has they have a reason for concern of saying, hey, you guys are moving dangerously close to us and surrounding us. I mean, people have to look at it from their perspective. If you're a Russian citizen and you have this world power, my son's here. I'll take him. my wife's going to work. So speaking of Russian, her boss.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, little guy's gonna co-host with me for a little bit.
Awesome.
Hi, buddy. Mommy's got to go to work. Okay.
We're gonna talk about some geopolitics.
I won't swear.
He doesn't understand
keep the language
yet, so you can swear. He doesn't know what the hell we're saying. But what was I talking about? Yeah. So absolutely, it's one of those things where now I lost my train of thought. What the fuck was I talking about?
We were just talking about. Just how obvious it was that there was some meddling in Ukraine, and I guess what I was trying, the terror I was going on before was that there was definitely like a weird. I believe that there has been movements made by external forces. I'm not saying in some kind of government conspiracy. I just mean PR forces, various different political movements to actually help paralyze the left and to help make them a mockery of itself. I think a lot of the things the so-called left side of the spectrum has adopted over the past couple of years have been particularly embarrassing for me personally, and I would consider myself a pretty far left liberal. But a lot of this stuff, I mean, I'm sure you've even seen this recently, like this Halloween costume thing at Yale, where all these students protested and tried to get fired. A faculty at Yale who basically wrote a response to this Halloween costume guideline memo saying, like, this is kind of ridiculous. Like, we should have like kids here should have the right to be obnoxious and offensive if they want to. Why are we telling them what Halloween costumes they can't wear? And students were so upset at Yale that they like shouted down and like signed a petition for this guy's firing simply because he was standing up for freedom of speech. He wasn't saying he agreed with racist or insensitive Halloween costumes. He was just saying, fuck it. If someone wants to wear those, let them be an obnoxious person. We'll mock them then or whatever. But it was like even just saying that.
Isn't that what freedom of speech is for? Is defend the unpopular opinions, because the popular opinions don't need defending.
But we've already seen examples of what happens when you take away certain types of offensive free speech. I mean, it's actually illegal in France and Germany to criticize or to be like a quote unquote Holocaust denier over there.
Yeah, you can't.
That's a crime. Yeah. You go to jail for it. So
and there's something wrong. And again, if I say that that's wrong, then people will be like, "Oh, what are you saying? The Holocaust didn't happen?" No, what I'm saying is that there's no part of history and there's no conversation that should be off limits. And people should have the right to talk about things, because in this aspect, maybe they're wrong by being a Holocaust denier. But there's going to be other aspects where they're going to be right and they're going to be unable to talk about it. So I think what you're doing is defending everything across the board where they can, and I think that's important. I think once you start putting restrictions on what people can and cannot say, it's a slippery slope, and you're not just restricting people who are saying something you don't agree with, but you're also
restricting everybody.
Yeah, you're restricting everybody.
Well, because then it comes down to the question of who decides what's offensive. I mean, any kind of mildly controversial speech will be offensive to somebody.
Robbie, you're doing a really good job of not laughing while I have an 8-month-old on my lap.
Even criticizing or even being pro-gay marriage, for example, or pro-gay is offensive to certain more, fundamentalist Christian people. But so you could really slice the argument in all these different ways, where I think people need to grow a thicker skin, obviously. This whole idea that you're not allowed to be offended, that people don't have the right to offend you, is complete bullshit. And I think what I was talking to you before we were talking about doing this podcast is the rise of this alt-right, alternative right-wing contrarian culture that sort of like Gavin McInnes is going all the way to like a 10 out of 10. Even so much so that it's like, is he serious? Like, is he bullshitting? Is he just trying to be funny? He's gotten so much to that level where it's like hard to tell. But I do think there's a little bit lower than that, world or scene, almost like a cottage industry of a lot of people, most of them on the internet, who are taking advantage of the fact that liberalism is being portrayed as a world full of overly sensitive babies who can't handle things.
Yeah, the PC
and that's not what that is not what the world that I came from was like. I mean, the core of a lot of liberalism that I came from revolved around fighting U.S. militarism. The anti-war community. That used to be a very core facet of the liberal community in the United States. That's mostly gone now. There really is no anti-war movement anymore. It's very sad, but it's mostly gone. I just talked to Cindy Sheehan, who was, widely known and was, almost like a household name towards the end of the Bush administration, because that's how much the anti-war movement was still prominent. Now, if you ask a kid who's maybe 10 years younger than us who Cindy Sheehan is, they might not even remember that whole experience or that whole thing took place, of her camping out at Crawford Ranch, trying to catch Bush on his way down there and to basically picket him and make sure that he saw all these people every day. I mean, it's really troubling to watch what becomes the sort of mainstream version of liberalism turn into something that I can't even really identify with anymore. Just in that regard, I mean, and even like WikiLeaks, it took I just wanted to say this last thing is it took a long time for, I think, other liberals like me. It even took me a long time to really feel like, you know what? Fuck this shit. I am not one of these people who's okay with stifling free speech. I'm totally not okay with it. I don't care what kind of speech it is, how offensive it is. I am not okay with that, and that is not liberalism to me.
Yeah, I completely
and I think I think like WikiLeaks finally is not finally. I mean, I don't even mean they had like some duty to, but they've started to point out this sort of increase in these sort of like, phrases like trigger warnings or these things that sort of are associated with this very strange, overly sensitive, so-called liberal climate right now in this country. The PC police. Raina Kalik, who's someone who, very liberal, like me and Abby, has started to write about it as well. Salon, a website that has actually perpetuated a lot of this bullshit in the past, has put out some of this stuff. There's articles now being written on Salon by college professors who are like, look, I'm as liberal as they come. I'm a super, I teach like a sex culture class. Like I was reading this article from a guy who was like, teach like a sex culture class in this university, and no matter what I do to try to accommodate the students' sensitivities, I always get accused of some form of racially insensitive. I was triggered by that. It's like, if this is really happening, part of me believes that it's exaggerated. Like, I don't think all college students are total wimps. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of it's true, but I think it's also being used to misrepresent and sort of inflate this idea that all college campuses and students are, these mentally incapable of like arguing or talking to someone in a way that where they disagree with them. But it's unfortunate that it has represented a lot of liberal people, now that's sort of become, and then, I was telling you earlier that like, I've started to like pay attention to a lot of this sort of what I would describe as more like alt right wing, comedy stuff. And that's how they see liberalism. It's like they see liberalism through that cartoon lens.
The PC,
you'll hear
the oversensitive. Yeah.
They don't talk about people like me or you or the things we believe. They talk about those people who talk about trigger warnings or who lie about being raped or just any of those things. And it's actually fascinating. I mean, and I think that it's created this sort of pendulum swinging back in the other direction now, where liberalism is now seen as like not hip anymore, and it's like now this sort of like alt-right, Gavin McInnes, sort of like Opie and Anthony political, like we're just like, we just don't give a shit. We believe what we believe, like kind of politics, like more legs. It's sort of making it feel like it's the hip thing now. Like it's the thing that if you're hip and if you're smart and you're not getting sucked into, these dumb, PR movements, you're going to be one of those. You're going to be anti-feminist. You're going to be, anti-transsexual or make a point to, be adamant about not like using the proper like gender nomenclature just because it's like stupid to you or whatever. I mean, I think that kind of mentality, unfortunately, seems like it's catching on more these days. It's getting more. It's just becoming more popular, and I think at the same time, liberalism or parts of it are becoming more embarrassing to people like me, and that's a problem. And the elimination of the anti-war movement. It's kind of like a multiple, intersecting problems, basically, in my mind, helping make liberalism something that people don't want to associate with as much. Even I think just taking away the anti-war movement itself did an extreme disservice to it. So I mean, that's pretty much my thoughts on it.
What's your opinion? One thing that kind of bothered me a little bit, I don't know if you're going to agree with me or not, but I remember during the Democratic debate how they had that Skype question of when they asked Bernie Sanders, which I think was kind of a setup question, where they're like, oh, do all lives matter or do black lives matter? And I feel like it was like they were trying to set him up for disaster, because if he says all lives matter, then black people are going to be angry. If he says Black Lives Matter, white people are going to be angry. So he's just going to piss off, both sides. So the politically correct thing to do was say Black Lives Matter because that's what they wanted to hear. And I think that's that's another example of how it's like, oh, these dumb liberals, it's like, what do you mean Black Lives Matter? It's like, what about white lives? And I kind of in that one perspective, I kind of get a little upset with it because I'm like, well, first of all, when the hell did all not include Black lives? But I also see the perspective of, I understand the point of what they're trying to do is put or highlight and put more attention on. You're making this really hard, bud. And put the attention on trying to get people to understand that maybe all lives do matter. Well, I say maybe. Obviously, all lives do matter, but there's been things have been unfair with the laws and the way that black people have been treated and how their culture and people have been suppressed throughout the years. And obviously, he's angry. He agrees. And I think that it's just so I do understand why they're doing it. But I think what ends up happening is that you end up pushing people away who are like, well, what do you mean? Well, why do you have to say all or Black Lives Matter? And I think that it also helps what you're saying, and it makes people think that, oh, look, these crazy liberals where they care, they're extremists when it comes down to these issues. If they're feminists, then they're almost feminists to a point where they're anti-men. If they care about Black lives, then it's almost to the point where they hate white lives or they don't care about white lives. It's like it's like, I think what's even happening now, and I'm not even saying this, I don't even mean to criticize you, because like this happens to me too. When I talk about this, we have a hard time even talking about it because that's how dogmatic and problematic sort of that world has become. Is that it's in this case it's because I have a baby on my lap. But
that too. Yeah, but I mean, even just the idea of like debating that difference, like you're right. It was a trap question, and why does everything have to be that narrow and dogmatic? Like, let's have an honest, open discussion about what that phrase means. If Black Lives Matter is even the best hashtag we can be coming up with right now, if it's not, I mean, apparently, I mean, I don't even know if this is 100% true, but the guy allegedly who came up with the hashtag Black Lives Matter, by all accounts, is some kind of like weird PR corporate shill who's constantly advertising McDonald's and putting all these weird promotions on Twitter. So I honestly don't know where that hashtag or that movement started in the first place. But I would argue that almost by definition, it does polarize things and make people think in these dogmatic ways where it's like, if you don't agree with the phrase, or just you might have some kind of issue with the wording, you're a racist, or you don't care about Black lives. It's like, that's not how people should have discussions about things. And I think that's a huge part of the problem, that we have become so dogmatic that's now what it comes down to. Oh, do you think Black Lives Matter or all lives matter? It's like, well, both answers would be a trap. It's like, it's such a polarized, I mean, it's like a perfect example of just how irritatingly polarized this has become, and in a way is really manufactured. I don't think that we as a society, or even black people in this country, are benefiting at all. They're actually being hurt by that kind of dumbing down and narrowing of the rhetoric to that point where it's like, well, are you with us or against us? I think it's just as dumbed down. And I think for me, the Black Lives Matter movement is where I started to notice a lot of this troubling dogma taking over liberalism, because on one hand, I agree 99% with most of what these people are talking about, but it's in the way that they try to shut other people down.
Yeah, it's their approach.
Who have different opinions is the part that really, really upsets me. And I think it colors the whole movement to the point where it actually discredits the real issues they're bringing up, the real issues of black men being shot by police unarmed, unfairly shot, or even unfairly jailed or accused. It, in my opinion, does a disservice to that real important issue by making it, just deducing it to this dumbed down polarized talking point. It's like, and I don't even think Ferguson was a particularly great example.
Yeah, I agree.
It wasn't the flashpoint that people were making out to be. I mean, I know it turned into one, but like Eric Garner, to me, I know Joe Rogan brought up that guy who got shot with a BB gun in the store as like the main, that should have been the main one. But I think the Eric Garner one was particularly,
I agree,
self-evident
because it was on.
It's
tape.
Just a guy being fucking choked out.
He was unarmed
on the street.
He was. I mean, the cops were there because they were called to break up a fight. They weren't even there because of him. It was so obvious. He did a chokehold that is illegal and should have never been done. And then they you get people who say, "Oh, look, it's not their fault that he was overweight and that this and that." And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, first of all, he should never been choked. He should never been harassed. And you could tell by his reaction, he's been harassed many of times before, because the way he was saying, he's like, well, you guys are, something along the lines like, you guys are always picking on me, or you guys are always busting my balls, or whatever he said about, you could tell it was a reoccurring theme. They're constantly harassing him. And because of it, he just, I think he finally had enough, and he was just sticking up for himself. And he's like, listen, leave me alone. No, and then, of course, this ego trip of certain police officers who they're not going to take no for answers. Like, you're not going to tell me what to do, and then this gang mentality where they all jumped on him, and he wasn't really well, first of all, people are like, oh, well, he was resisting arrest. Well, he should have never been arrested in the first place. Why the fuck was he getting arrested in the first place? How about we get to that? Listen, buddy.
Or even just, let's say, for example, what if the guy who did that to Eric Garner was charged, with something? Best case scenario for public justice would be that the guy gets charged with murder and is treated just like any other murder or whatever, second-degree murder.
It's what should have happened.
Yeah, but like, there's other examples too. I mean, I don't remember what state this happened in, but a female police officer kicked a woman in the groin so hard that she died after she was cuffed in the police car. And it's like, we don't even hear about that, and she happened to be black. But I mean, I think that at the same time, though, too, we do have a police brutality problem on top of the fact that black people are unfairly targeted and accused and arrested and killed and beaten by police. They're two different problems, and I wish that we could look at them at least a little bit separately, because I do think police in general across the board, using pain compliance as a method is not proper. It's not appropriate. Maybe it's illegal, but threatening someone with a taser to get out of their car, I mean, I don't even think that should be allowed personally. But it just seems like they're willing to use tasers for anything these days, if you just talk to them wrong. So I think that needs to be addressed too, and I'm not saying that, black lives don't matter as much as white lives or anything like that. I mean, I'm just saying that I think we've narrowed this down too much, and there is a lot of what I would call race baiting on both sides of the spectrum right now, trying to sensationalize and use these events for their own political advantage, even if some of them are really just. Even with Ferguson, I do think a lot of political interest got involved in that and kind of colored what that was. You could argue the same thing happened with Occupy, that once sort of the Democratic Party started to latch onto it, the movement kind of immediately became ruined and watered down. These movements need to be grassroots, but at the same time, I think we've reached an era where grassroots can also mean people being influenced by PR campaigns too. So it gets confusing, But yeah, I completely agree that, it was a trap question to ask Bernie Sanders, and I think it's silly.
It is silly, and because now you're also, out of all the candidates, I mean, he's obviously not nearly one of the worst. The worst people like Hillary are the people who you should be harassing and making look bad, and not a guy like Bernie who, yeah, I mean, obviously there's questions about his foreign policy and stuff like that, but God, man, I'm much more scared of having Hillary in office than I am Bernie Sanders. So I just think that the fact that they were making him look bad kind of, bothered me a little bit, because I'm like, out of all the candidates, like, really, you want to pick on him? Like, I don't know, man. I feel like there's bigger fish to fry.
Oh, I agree. I mean, my initial thought when when those Black Lives Matter protesters took over his speech, you remember that when that happened?
Yeah.
I thought, did Hillary send these people out? I mean, honestly, it just seemed like such a weird thing for that movement to focus on him. Like, what's the point?
And who would help poor black people in inner cities more than a socialist anyways? Like, it just seems kind of silly, It's like, I'm pretty sure, like, if you pay attention to his policies and what he's saying, like, he'd probably, he's not coming out and saying that, hey, I'm specifically only trying to help the black community, but his policies would help the black community, And so why would you try to intentionally try to make him look bad and cut him off like that? And I mean, what has Hillary said about, Black Lives Matter or any of these other candidates? It's just, or these, these Republicans, which are obviously, much worse. So I just think, I think the whole thing is just, it was ridiculous. You end up picking on somebody who probably shouldn't have been picked on, and is definitely not the the worst of all candidates. Oh, he has a microphone. And so I mean, it definitely seemed like counterproductive and kind of silly. So but I don't know what they were thinking, but we're definitely gonna have to do this again, Robbie, very soon, because I think we busted through 2.5 hours or something like that pretty quickly.
Oh shit! Yeah, we did.
So
I realize.
well, definitely next time we won't wait so long for you to come on, because there's still a bunch of other stuff I wanted to talk about that we didn't hit on. So I'll hit you up. We'll definitely get you on again. I'm looking forward to part 2, which you said. Oh, and also I wanted to let you know about Empire Files. The music is awesome. I think that
thanks.
It makes the show seem fucking scary, to be honest. I mean, it has like such this creepy sound to it, which is good, because it kind of creepy topics. I mean, it kind of fits the theme of the show, with all the kind of these are important and sometimes scary topics and information that you guys are talking about. So it was awesome to see that they were using your music, and you're working with your sister with that. Hey, buddy. Wait a couple more minutes.
Let me plug the movie one last time before we sign off. So you can get the DVD. I don't know if you can see it there.
Yeah, my 8-month-old loved it. It was
so the DVDs I'm selling off. We're selling them off of MediaRoots.org, and if you go to my blog, veryheavyagenda.blogspot.com, there's an option to watch it on Vimeo on demand. You can either rent or buy a digital copy for a fairly low price. And then the DVD I am selling for $20, which includes shipping anywhere in the United States. It's a little bit extra if you live in Canada or elsewhere. And we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but I want people to check out some of the new revelations about the 2001 anthrax attacks that I've been digging into. We have an interview with someone who is in jail right now named Matt DeHart, who claims to have been given a series of documents proving CIA involvement in the 2001 anthrax attacks. Since he's in jail, he has no ability to release these documents. We're basically hoping that someone who has them or who has seen them leaks them. So right now, it's still kind of up in the air, but there's some really interesting stuff in that interview, and I recommend people should check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I listened to it. It was something I wanted to talk about, but obviously we didn't get to this time around. But I'll definitely have you on again. There's, like I said, it's cool because you're one of those guests I could talk to about anything that's really going on in current events or historically and stuff. So it's nice to not be restricted to.
He got your pop filter.
He did.
Or he got your little foam piece.
The
for your
foam
mic.
on the microphone. Yeah. But, you good, buddy? But well, I'll tell you. Once I had him, he only motivated me more to want to continue to this podcast, because it's just I truly believe in trying to leave the world a little better than we received it. And when you look at kids and you look at their future, it's like, I just look at him like I'm doing my best to try to, try to leave you a little better world than we had. So it definitely is another piece of inspiration and motivation to continue doing these things. And but yeah, Robbie, thank you so much. Check out Empire Files, which is your sister's show, which you can get on YouTube, and it's on Telesur, I believe, right?
Telesur, but she prefers you go to the Empire Files channel on YouTube because Telesur uploads their own. They've uploaded like the wrong version a couple times to their YouTube channel. So like the ones on the Empire Files YouTube channel are actually the correct. Like some of them have some fixes and things that were corrected in the final version. Okay. And then it's also on Real News Network, so it's kind of weird. It's on
I've seen it on
different
there too.
places. Yeah, they're producing it. Telesur is funding it, and when I say they're producing it, I mean mostly independently produced by Abby. They just sort of give her the resources that she needs. They have a TV studio and stuff. So
yeah, it's an awesome show. I'm glad to see that she's back on TV. She's still, I think, the only guest I have on my bucket list I haven't had on the show that hopefully one. I think I emailed her once and she told me she was real busy, and then I just never got hold of her again. So hopefully I'd love to have her on, because you guys do awesome work. If you guys haven't checked out Media Roots, check out Media Roots. Like I said, that Congo podcast was super eye-opening, and it was cool that you guys hit on so many different topics and even stuff like that I didn't know too much about. And check it out, Media Roots. Robbie's always doing stuff on there, and check out his old documentary, American Anthrax. I believe is still on YouTube, isn't it? And people can still check that out.
Yeah. We're gonna put a DVD of that out soon with about an hour of bonus content. So I'll let you know.
Awesome. Yeah.
More details when that's coming up.
Yeah, awesome. And then we'll have you on again, and we'll talk some more. Hopefully when the baby's not here.
Or even if it is, it's fine.
Yeah. Thanks, Robbie. I really appreciate it.
All right, man.
Hey,
Thank you so much, Ricky.
Thanks, Robbie.
Yeah,
it's
keep doing what you're doing.
Hey, you too, man. You're doing some important work. I think you and your sister are a hell of a duo. I love the fact that you're outspoken on Twitter. You don't give a shit who you piss off, and you speak your mind regardless, and I think that's awesome. And and it's ballsy, because even people like myself sometimes, like I said, I tiptoe certain opinions just because I'm afraid of offending somebody or not know where, like you said, you don't know where they stand, and you don't want them to look at you all weird. So which
it's tricky. Yeah, there's definitely some people on Twitter who won't talk to me, who probably, if they didn't see my timeline, might be talking to me because of the shit I say.
Yeah.
So it's probably had a cost, but whatever. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, but at least people know when they talk to Robbie, what you see is what you get. You're not bullshitting anybody, and I think that's what we love about you. I think you're a real person with no hidden agendas, and I think that's refreshing. I think that's what people are drawn to that.
Thank you.
Want to say anything? No, he's just gonna try to eat it.
He likes it though. He's gonna have his own podcast someday.
Thanks, Robbie.
All right, man.
All right,
take care, dude.
Thank you.
Believe in the ripple effect.